populasi. Pertama ada kelelawar, itu disebut satwa liar. Ada hewan ternak. Di sini kan kita lihat ada sapi, kemudian ada kuda, kemudian kita ada manusia.
Nama saya Esap, tinggal di Perantenggia, Dusun Batu Basi, Desa Jenetesa, Kecamatan Simbang, Kabupaten Maros. Kita kelelawar di sini Pak sebagai kita tradisikan. Kita tidak ganggu. Demi pesan orang-orang tua. Mula-mula datang kelelawar ya sekitar 5 ekor begitu. Dia berkembang terus, bapak yang bilang jangan yang ganggu. Karena ini kalau kita ini jangan diganggu karena ada hikmahnya nanti. Katanya itu kelelawar bisa bersatu karena bersamaan dia terbang. Iya, satu arah. Mudah-mudahan katanya di sini masyarakat bisa juga bersatu satu arah, bergotong royong. Karena itu kan sering bapak bilang, mudah-mudahan seperti kelelawar bersatu bergotong royong, satu arah. Iya.
Nama Abdul Qadir. Saya beternak sapi kurang lebih 7 tahun. Kalau gangguannya sih tidak ada karena mungkin kelelawarnya juga habis tidak diganggu di sini dan masyarakat juga menjaga. Kelelawar di sini tidak mengganggu kesehatan sapi. Kalau malang juga dia terbang keluar cari makan. Dan tanaman juga di sini tidak diganggu juga. Seperti mangga, pepayanya, pisang, tidak diganggu juga. Ya kalau dilihat sih di berita-berita dan penyampaian dari pemerintah luar, tidak ada bagus di sini. Di sini kelelawarnya tidak ada yang sakit juga, masyarakat juga sehat semua ji. Dan kita di sini selalu hidup berdampingan dengan kelelawar.
Tujuan dari pengambilan sampel untuk mendeteksi dini terhadap penyakit-penyakit virus yang kemungkinan akan menginfeksi hewan ternak yang nantinya akan menular kepada manusia. Pengambilan sampel dilakukan berupa darah, kemudian swab nasal, swab rektal, kemudian dilakukan pengujian di laboratorium untuk mendeteksi penyakit-penyakit yang kemungkinan muncul dari penularan dari satwa liar atau kelelawar kepada hewan domestik. Survei atau pemantauan terhadap penyakit-penyakit virus yang berpotensi menular dari hewan liar ke domestic animals dilakukan sejak tahun 2016 sampai tahun 2020. Menariknya, di Desa Jenetesa, Kecamatan Simbang, Kabupaten Maros, belum ditemukan adanya penyakit-penyakit tersebut yang berpotensi menular ke hewan domestik. Hal tersebut disebabkan karena adanya keseimbangan ekosistem. Nah, ada 3 faktor yang menyebabkan terjadinya munculnya penyakit yang pertama adalah faktor lingkungan, kemudian faktor agen atau faktor virusnya atau bakteri dan sebagainya, dan faktor dari inang atau host. Untuk itu kami mengajak kepada seluruh lapisan masyarakat untuk tetap menjaga keseimbangan lingkungan, keseimbangan ekosistem, sehingga kita masih bisa berdampingan dengan satwa liar dan hewan-hewan domestik yang ada di sekitar kita.
Di Desa Janetesa, di sana kita melihat ada interface antara satwa liar, dalam hal ini kelelawar, hewan ternak. Di situ ada sapi, kuda, dan manusia tentunya. Beberapa penelitian sudah melaporkan bahwa pada kelelawar itu hidup berbagai patogen yang secara alamiah ada di tubuh kelelawar, hidup normal yang kita kenal sebagai reservoir. Nah, ini kalau ada perubahan ekologi atau faktor-faktor risiko lainnya, itu dapat melompat patogennya ke hewan ternak yang dikenal dengan spillover, dan itu bisa berpotensi untuk menimbulkan pandemi. Dari sisi Kementerian Pertanian, kita concern kepada hewan ternaknya, jadi deteksi patogen yang berpotensi untuk penyakit menular baru pada hewan ternak. Itu di Desa Janetesa.
Alhamdulillah, selama kita berdampingan di sini, selama sekian tahun ini, tidak ada juga dampak baik penyakitnya apa. Ya, kami tidak saling mengusik. Dia juga ada, kita juga aktivitas di sini, masyarakat seperti biasa saja, seakan-akan bahwa tidak ada kelelawar yang selama ini di sini, khususnya di Parangtinggia ini. Harapan kami, ya, peternaknya sehat, warganya sehat, peternaknya sejahtera. Ya, itulah harapan kami.
Para peternak itu kalau malam hari mereka itu mau menginap di lokasi penampungan, tapi kalau siang hari mereka naik lagi ke atas untuk memberi makan ataupun menjaga ternak mereka.
Kalau saya ngungsi, ternaknya nggak harus ikut ngungsi, Mbak. Itu udah di tempat pengungsian, udah ada kandang komunal yang bagus.
Bagaimana cara mencegah biar kalian tidak terkena penyakit rabies? Ayo Bapak Ibu silahkan masuk.
Saya aktif berkampanye kepada anak-anak masalah rabies di Bali karena saya ingin melindungi anak-anak khususnya yang ada di Bali karena anak-anak yang lebih sering berinteraksi dengan anjing-anjing liar di luar, Mbak. Karena apa? Dengan seringnya berinteraksi itu bahaya terhadap gigitan dari anjing liar ini sangat mengancam mereka. Ini tak kasih air gimana dia? Wih, takut dia. Lagi-lagi. Iya, kalau seperti ini rabies nggak anjingnya? Rabies, ya. Tepuk tangan untuk Chelsea.
Yang sangat paling saya senangi, jadi mereka tuh bisa menerima, bisa memberikan masukan buat mereka tentang bahaya rabies itu.
Seperti misalnya drama di mana begitu anak digigit anjing, apa yang harus mereka lakukan? Seperti mencuci luka dengan sabun selama 15 menit dan melaporkan ke puskesmas.
Kita menggunakan misalnya flip chart atau metode bernyanyi, bertepuk, itu adalah karena kita mengemas penyuluhan ini dalam bentuk dunia anak, dunia yang menyenangkan, dunia bergembira, tapi inti-inti dari nilai-nilai penyuluhan itu masuk pada mereka. Mereka mengerti apa tujuan dari penyuluhan.
Bagikan kepada orang tua, kakak, atau nenek, atau kakek.
Harapan kami ke depan, seluruh elemen masyarakat di Bali, baik itu anak-anak, dewasa, pemerintah, semua bersatu padu untuk melakukan pencegahan dan pemberantasan rabies ini, sehingga tidak ada korban lagi di Bali terhadap rabies ini.
Para peternak itu kalau malam hari mereka itu mau menginap di lokasi penampungan, tapi kalau siang hari mereka naik lagi ke atas untuk memberi makan ataupun menjaga ternak mereka.
Kalau saya ngungsi, ternaknya nggak harus ikut ngungsi, Mbak. Itu udah di tempat pengungsian, udah ada kandang komunal yang bagus.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Greetings to all of us. To the Honorable, the T20 Task Force 6 lead co-chair and former dean and former professor of health economics and policy of the School of Public Health, Universitas Indonesia, Dr. Hasbullah Tabrani. To the distinguished speakers, health economists, healthcare industry leaders, policymakers, and everyone who is watching our event tonight around the world. My name is Rizky Ramadan, and I am going to serve as the Master of Ceremony for tonight's event. And welcome to the second day of Implementing and Financing One Health webinar, presented by Task Force 6 of the T20 Indonesia, Global Health Security and COVID-19. Ladies and gentlemen, for the next 3 hours, we would like to listen to a very insightful discussion from the experts that will explore enhanced implementation of One Health through a multi-sectoral and multidisciplinary approach to emerging infectious disease prevention and early detection through sustained involvement throughout the disease emergence cycle. And the discussion is intrigued by some related issues that require a close collaboration between different sectors, which may often have differing priorities, capacities, and mandates. Furthermore, it requires adequate financing for prevention and detection. And although prevention is far more cost-effective than cure, the amount of financing allocated to some crucial areas has been shown to be very small compared to the need and tiny compared to the economic cost of having to respond to an epidemic or pandemic that could have been prevented. Ladies and gentlemen, before we start our event, we would like to announce tonight's housekeeping rule that all participants must obey. So first of all, please be aware that tonight's webinar is recorded as documentation. Second of all, we provide translation service from Indonesian to English and vice versa. So please, if you want to use the feature, please take a look at the translation feature below. And third of all, we would like to inform that we are going to have a question and answer session by the end of the session. Therefore, please submit your question to the Q&A feature to get your question answered by the speakers. Next, please fill out the link of attendance form that will be sent in the chat box. And also by the end of the session, we are going to send the link of feedback that you can fill out as an input for us to organize our next event better. And lastly, to facilitate the transition process in the discussion session, we would like to ask all of our speakers to keep the camera on throughout the session. Ladies and gentlemen, before we start our event, let's hear the welcoming remarks from the T20 Task Force 6 lead co-chair and former dean and professor of health economics and policy of the School of Public Health, Universitas Indonesia. Please welcome Dr. Hasbullah Tabrani.
Thank you, Mas Rizky Ramadan. Thank you, our organizer, the USAID Indonesia, SAYAG, Center for Health Economy, Health Administration, Management and Policy Studies, Faculty Public Health, Universitas Indonesia. Thanks also for all the presenters, speakers who will be joining us tonight in Jakarta, this morning maybe in the US, or afternoon in the Europe and Africa, but also it's very late probably for some of our presenters. Thanks very much for Prof. Barbara McFaig and Dr. Angus Campbell of Nosal Institute for Global Health, University of Melbourne. I know it's late there, but thanks very much for your willingness to share, to present the issues of this global health. Also, Dr. Chakrapani Chatla, physician and public health specialist, regional manager for Asia Pacific and Japan, Thermo Fisher Scientific, Thanks also for Prof. Nitis Devnath, DAI Bangladesh and DAI Bangladesh and Och left expert. I'm sorry, I might not be pronounced well for that. Those three speakers will present and stimulate our discussion for One Health. And also we are happy to have 6 panelists, Sitaram Chandra Mahiraju, Senior Agriculture Economist, World Bank, Anna Okelio, Research Program Manager for Livestock and System, RCR, Dr. Ehtupsin Silek Damba, WCS, sorry for not pronouncing well, Mongolia Country Directors, and John Waver, Senior Animal Health and Epidemiology Advisor, HSP, for your willingness to share experience, knowledge, and everything that you are aware, to contribute to the T20 meeting. The T20 is a think tank part of the G20 that will contribute to the G20 later on. Thank you also for Professor Agus Wandono from Indohon, who will be also giving a summary of yesterday's meetings. One Health is important tool that we have together use it to prevent, to identify, and to also be ready for hopefully not happening, but it is possible that we might have some health problem. Not many people aware that basically it is most likely that the COVID that already took about $3 trillion US dollar of the global productivities because of the emerging disease, new disease that probably coming from animal that spread to us. Before that, there are many also disease, what we call it zoonosis, coming from animals. In Indonesia currently, the mouth and claw disease of the our cows that threaten the health of the people. The climate change might also provide all the situation that makes virus or some other harmful agents mutate, transform, and easily jump from animal to human or within the human and make it the mutation and create more serious condition. Hopefully now, but if that happens, we have to be prepared. So today, tonight, this morning, this afternoon, we will hear, we will listen the expert voice, and from there, we might learn a lot, and we expect that in September until November, we will convey this information, a policy brief, what are needed to prevent the world from having the similar situation like we have with COVID recently, to the G20 meeting in Bali. That will be a great contribution if all of us can also share what is experience of what is our concern to contribute to the better, healthier of human being in this planet. Thank you very much for all, and have a good discussion. Thank you. Back to Rizky.
Thank you. We would like to thank Dr. Hasbullah Tabrani for the remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, yesterday we have completed the first day of the webinar. So before we move into the keynote presentation and the panel discussion session, let's refresh our memory by listening to the conclusion of yesterday's session, which will be delivered by the coordinator of Indonesian One Health University Network, or Indohun. Please welcome Professor Agus Suwandono.
Thank you very much, Rizky. Mas Rizky. Can you hear my voice?
Yes,
can you hear
loud and
me?
clear.
Okay. First of all, I would like to thanks to distinguished Professor Hasbullah Tabrani for this great encouragement and invaluable support to conduct this webinar concerning implementing and financing One Health. As all of us know, that this webinar is a 2-day series of tandem webinar. The first webinar was conducted yesterday, Thursday, June 2nd, and concentrating on the implementation of One Health. And today is the second webinar, which will be focused on the financing One Health. In this opportunity, allow me to report to all of you the summary of day one. In day one, there were 2 sessions of a webinar. The session 1 was about One Health governance and platforms, and it was moderated by Dr. Kevin Olival from Eco Health Alliance. In this session, the panelists discussed a successful example of One Health coordination, the critical gaps and priority issues of One Health governance and platform at the global, regional, and national level to truly strengthen and sustain the One Health system. There were excellent discussion of how the health system in India, Thailand, and African country respond to the recent pandemic, as well as how the international agencies support the health system in various countries in dealing with the pandemic. While in session 2 was the One Health research, education, network, and workforce development. The session was moderated by Dr. Deborah Kuchafar of the Tufts University. In this second session, the panelists spoke about what is gain. For example, like what is the value added by being part of the One Health research or education network, and share example of the network working synergistically to create something better than only individual works. Also, they talk about the requirement for a sustainable network, existing gap, efforts to strengthen the connection, collaboration in order to share and leverage the resource better. Another subject share was major barriers to forming the networks in the research and education. There is a good discussion in the example of how the Southeast Asia One Health Network, or SIHUN, in collaboration with the One Health workforce in its countries such as the Indonesia and Vietnam, to contribute the detection, prevention, and response of the pandemic, especially in improving the capacity of One Health workforce on their soft skill in coordination, collaboration, and communication. Based on the excellent input of those panelists, moderators, and very active as well as a critical discussion from most of the webinar participants, allow me to underline some important issues, points, as well as some challenging recommendation. The first one One Health is now broadly accepted as an important concept, including last year G20 call to action on building on the health resilience and the recent UN quadripartite One Health Joint Plan of Action. But as we heard from all of the panelists and the participant discussion of the participant, One Health still faces challenges to implement, partly because of imbalance of the funding, staffing, and mandates across sectors, as well as other factors such as politics, bureaucracy, etc. Second, we cannot continue to focus only on the strengthening human health system and wait for the disease to emerge. Multi-sectoral One Health approaches are underway globally, but require greater attention to animal health, wildlife health, and environment health, and land use in order to support proactive surveillance, zoonotic disease risk mitigation, and the data as well as analysis needed for early warning system. However, this need to be significant scale up to be impactful at the global, national, and subnational level. So, what we need first is to sustain the national and global funding for One Health early detection, prevention, and preparedness. And the financing mechanism being discussed under the G20 is an excellent start and needs to better connect ministries of finance and planning with the Ministry of Health, but also with the Ministry of Agriculture, Environment, and Forestry in each country. Second, significant scale up is needed of One Health surveillance across key wildlife, livestock, human environment interface, including the community-based surveillance. Number three, build on what working today and put the political and financial resources to strengthen One Health cooperation, coordination, communication and collaboration, and building capacity mechanism at the regional, national, subnational, as well as community level. Number four is to develop and expand the interoperable, open, and rapid data sharing mechanism across sector, within country, among country, regional, and global. Five is to have the workforce that takes on these challenges, strengthen One Health research network and workforce training and education, of course. Government are encouraged to leverage the capacity of university network, the university themselves, NGO, industry, and the private sector. And then two additional important thing is we should intensify and building the capacity of the community in cutting off the human-animal environment interface, balancing ecosystem, and considering the use of the positive local culture and wisdom, and their socio-economic network and their organization. The last recommendation is to leverage and to intensify the cooperation, coordination, collaboration, and communication among donor agencies in helping countries to internalize the One Health concept or approach to be more efficient, effective, as well as to avoid duplication. Hopefully this important point and recommendation can enrich this second day webinar concerning financing One Health, and also to the upcoming One Health June 8 side event of G20, as well as to remind to the main G20 working group and the events. One more, thank you for everyone contributed to this webinar, and we thank you all for joining this existing second day of the webinar, which will focus on the financing One Health. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and my God bless all of us. Thank you. Back to you, Mas Rizky. Over.
We would like to thank Professor Agus Suwandono for the summary. Ladies and gentlemen, we will continue the event with the keynote presentation. The session will be led by two presenters, and our first presenter is Professor Barbara McPeak, who is a health economist with more than 30 years experience, specializing in health policy and health system research. Professor McPeak was appointed Director of the Nossal Institute for Global Health, University of Melbourne in July 2014, and her current interests include development of a program of One Health Economics initially focused on the Mekong region, supported by the Australian government, health system transition in the Asia Pacific, and the impact of non-communicable disease on health, seeking behavior and expenditure in India, which was supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And along with Professor Barbara McPeak is our second speaker, Associate Professor Angus Campbell, who leads the One Health unit at the Nossal Institute for Global Health, University of Melbourne. He is a specialist livestock veterinarian and epidemiologist working in One Health International Agriculture, Development and Livelihood Security, Research and Teaching. His work seeks to especially support rural livelihoods through better livestock, health and management, addressing human-animal disease interaction, sustainable agricultural practices, and assessing animal health economics and farm profitability. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's hear the keynote presentation under the title of One Health Financial and Management Practices to Address Threats at the Human-Animal Environment Interface. Please welcome Professor Barbara McPeak and Associate Professor Angus Campbell of Nossal Institute for Global Health, University of Melbourne.
Thank you very much, Rizky, and thank you very much to the T20 for having myself and Professor McPeak speak tonight. I'm going to kick off the first part of our talk, and then Professor McPeak will follow me. Also, thank you very much to Professor Suwandono for that excellent summary of the day one discussion, and also to Professor Tabrani for his opening remarks. Welcome everyone from Western Melbourne tonight. I'm speaking from the lands of the Indigenous Kulin Nation, and I acknowledge the elders past, present and emerging from whose land I'm speaking to tonight. As Rizky said, we are tonight going to talk about One Health financial and management practices to address One Health issues at the human-animal and environment interface. And I just, as our previous speakers have already identified, just want to acknowledge that the G20 has firmly placed its stamp on the importance of One Health, both in the Rome Declaration from the G20 last year, and also in the One Health side event coming up in Lombok next week. And it recognises truly that One Health is essential to global health, security and sustainable economic development. And I think all of us here tonight know that One Health offers efficient ways to tackle problems that arise and or affect different sectors across humans, animals, agriculture and the environment. But I want to just keep our perspective here. This ranges from the very specific to zoonotic diseases, but right up to, and this is importantly identified in the G20 concept note for the side event next week, up to the big existential multi-sectoral threats and challenges that we face as a global community. And these are things like food insecurity or food safety, or creating sustainable livelihoods, as well as endemic and emerging infectious diseases. So we understand that the solutions to these kinds of threats really do require this collaborative action across multiple sectors, and we're talking about things beyond public health. And these are what are captured in the left-hand side of the quadripartite's classic One Health diagram. We're attempting to work together across agriculture and livestock and the environment and more. But here we are at an event today talking about under a banner of health security. And we heard yesterday that there are good examples of One Health practice globally. Things such as Professor Flora's report on Bangladesh's One Health Secretariat, through to specific disease control programs such as rabies control in Bali or trypanosomiasis in Uganda, or avian influenza control in Southeast Asia. But I just want to bring us back to the idea that this concept note from the G20 says, as other speakers have already identified tonight, that many countries, or that we still do struggle with One Health, and that achieving this effective cross-sectoral cooperation, or what we want to call joint working, remains an ongoing challenge in many places. And that's what we want to start to try to unpack in our keynote presentation tonight. In other words, we have a good technical foundation for One Health, but where it's been successful, our observation is that it's often focused on bringing a multi-sectoral response to a specific disease. And this has really catalysed One Health in many settings. But One Health experts, including our panellists last night, acknowledge that it's often hard to get stakeholder traction for One Health beyond that disease response phase. And that was an emerging theme from last night's discussion. And we have also noticed that in the consultations that we have conducted at the Nossel Institute with One Health stakeholders over the last 2 years in work funded by the Asian Development Bank. And I also want to note that, as Kevin Olival said yesterday, with our emerging understanding of what drives emerging disease, things like land use change, agricultural practices that are unsustainable, and wildlife use and trade, what we're seeking to do, if we understand those things, is that we have to move One Health from this disease response idiom to one of disease prevention. But we're also trying to do it to unknown and emerging threats, which adds extra complexity to what we're trying to do. So we're trying to take One Health to the next level, but we are asking it to work in this sphere where we are competing against these big single sector priorities, things like food production, economic development, and natural resource management. And they actually get in the way of One Health cooperation because people are focused on these objectives and their priorities within the sector, let alone working across sectors. So we're asking One Health to overcome that as a barrier. But as Frank Berta said in the panel last night, we also expect One Health to add value to these big ticket single sector objectives. So we're asking One Health to transform and overcome barriers to its own operation, but also add value to those very things that impede its progress. And also, as I just mentioned, we're trying to transform One Health from a way to respond to diseases, to prevent disease threats, but to prevent things that we don't actually know about, it's much harder for us to focus on. And the reason I'm saying this is that it brings us to this tiny little part of the One Health diagram. It's these cogs in the middle. And that's what I think we need to talk about tonight. So no one is debating the why we should do One Health. We all believe that it adds value in terms of its efficiencies and the multiple benefits that it can deliver, both to disease control, but also to assist these other big sectoral objectives that society faces. But if we're going to think about how to do that successfully, we have to think beyond why we should do One Health, and we need to think of how we should do One Health. And that's what Barbara and I want to speak about a bit more tonight and get the conversation going about this. And of course, here's the very challenge of One Health, this how. We know from business and management literature that when we bring together a diverse set of technical experts with a wide range of experiences, that very diversity, which we recognise is needed for One Health and is the strength of One Health, actually impedes successful operation of teams. In other words, the nature of One Health fundamentally affects the efficacy of One Health joint working and teamwork. And so what we need to think about when we say what's going on in these cogs and these mechanisms of One Health is that, and our call to action is that we need to think about this very explicitly, and we need to unpack what is going to make One Health work as we tackle these bigger multi-sectoral challenges in the future. And what we need to do is we need to think about the institutional mechanisms that can make One Health work. And when we say institutional mechanisms, they are how One Health should be financed, what cooperation is required for successful joint working, and what management and leadership, beyond just generic soft skills, are required to actually make One Health function properly. And if we can think about these institutional mechanisms, and we're not pretending that we have all the solutions here, but we want to open up the conversation to explicitly examine these issues. Within these institutional mechanisms, what we seek to do is to have the mechanisms successfully incentivize the joint work required for One Health, and also to support effective formation of One Health teams that are led and managed successfully by effective One Health leadership. So our call to action is to give greater consideration to these institutional mechanisms, because if we do this, we believe we can directly address our One Health challenges more successfully. So they're the things like these health security issues that we've got up here. But also, that will help us even more successfully address these existing objectives on the right-hand side that the different technical specialists and institutions are probably more focused on a day-to-day basis, and which currently are the barriers to this effective joint working. So let's just have a look at what some of these might actually be. So we're talking about these critical institutional mechanisms are things like what budget mechanisms are in place to make One Health work. And maybe this is something that we do have growing and successful examples of. I think they are often a single source, a budget source to drive One Health, rather than budgets being dispersed across different ministries. And they're needed because they're the things that determine who is funded to do what. And as I've already heard tonight and in the panel discussion yesterday, it is a great challenge to have all the money somewhere, but all the expectation of activity to be occurring somewhere else. But also, we think that within the budget mechanisms, we need to understand how that actually creates incentives for more effective One Health joint working. We also think we need to explicitly examine what organisational structures are going to drive One Health successfully. These hierarchies shape the authority for making critical, enabling critical functions. Things like disease surveillance and what rules we need for information sharing. But we also recognise that there are very strong and appropriate privacy and commercial considerations that are completely opposed currently in some situations to this call for open data sharing. So we need organisational structures that respect privacy and acknowledge commercial considerations to make this open data sharing actually a successful reality. And then we need to go on and think more about maybe things that haven't been considered quite so much previously. What employment structures and contract career structures are necessary for effective One Health joint working. And all this needs to be wrapped together in effective One Health leadership practice to operationalise all of these other elements. So now to unpack the joint working nature in a little bit more detail, I'm going to pass over to my colleague, Professor McPake. Over to you now, Barbara.
Good morning, good afternoon and good evening to all. And can I also start by thanking Dr. Agus, Dr. Tabrani and our Master of Ceremonies for framing the discussion so far. Angus, could you move the slide on to the next one, please? So the institutional mechanisms that Angus has just outlined need to be structured so that they enable and encourage joint working. And to structure them appropriately, we need to understand what joint working is to consist of for any particular purpose. In other words, we need to unbundle joint working and interrogate what kind of joint working is needed and appropriate for what task or objective. Next slide, please, Angus. We've developed this CCCI framework to support this unbundling and interrogation. And what you can see on the slides is the bundles that we've unbundled. So communication is one form of joint working, simply means sharing information. Coordination involves aligning and making sure that different activities work well together, but they're still carried out separately. Collaboration means working together but maintaining separate entities, so two organizations can send people to work in a team. And integration means merging those entities. So you can see in principle, these move us along on a spectrum from, if you like, joint working light to joint working in depth. Now, we postulate that there are 4 factors that determine which kind of joint working is likely to be most appropriate. On the one hand, we have the extent and distribution of specialist knowledge. So if there's a great deal of specialist knowledge and it's highly asymmetrically distributed, it's mostly in one sector or the other, or there's different specialist knowledges in the 2 sectors, that makes moving along this spectrum towards integration more difficult. The other things make it more necessary and easier. So if timing considerations are important, for example, it's important to do 2 things at the same time, then we need to at least communicate about when we're doing it and probably coordinate so that we at least ensure that the 2 things are happening at the same time. If there are externalities, which you can also think of as spillover effect, if activities in one sector affect activities in the other sector, then we're going to need to collaborate. We're going to need to work through to make sure that our effects on each other, where they're positive, are maximized, and where they're negative are minimized. And where there are economies of scope or joint production, which means that there are efficiencies to doing things in an integrated way, well, that means that we will need to think about how we can integrate our activities so that we act as a single entity when we do that. Could I have the next slide, please, Angus? This summarizes the arguments of that I've just made, that specialist knowledge tends to push you back to doing things individually, but the other 3 things suggest that you should progress successively across the spectrum. So I'll give you a couple of examples to perhaps make this a little less abstract and a little bit more practical. So for example, for surveillance in the animal and human health systems, there's specialist expertise in conducting it, specialist knowledge to recognize disease in animals and humans that are concentrated in the animal and human sectors individually. There are few timing issues, few externalities, and because of the specialist knowledge, little feasibility of joint production or a single entity surveying both populations for disease. So the kind of working needed would appear to be communication or sharing information, but not much more. Take a contrasting example, rodent control. There's little specialist knowledge. We could probably all figure out how to kill rats. There's some timing advantage. For example, if you eliminate rodents indoors and outdoors at the same time, one doesn't serve as the reservoir for the other. And there are some externalities which are also related to the reservoir problem, and there are potentials for economies of scope and joint production. The kind of working needed seems to be integration, where you send a single entity to go and kill all the rats in the farm and the household, and don't worry too much about whether it's the human or the animal health sector that does that, or an integrated version of the 2. Now, not all examples are as clear-cut, and we'll often have to evaluate the extent to which the constraint of specialist knowledge can be mitigated to enable the advantages associated with timing, externalities, and economies of scope and joint production. So an institutional mechanism designed to encourage communication might not be so effective at enabling collaboration. So if we want to understand how institutional mechanisms support and encourage joint working, we have to be clear what kind of joint working we are talking about. Next slide, please. So I think we can draw from that and from some of the things that Angus was saying earlier, some ideas about what the facilitators and barriers are to joint working that give keys to the kind of things that we're going to need in these institutional mechanisms to make sure that this joint working is possible. So on the facilitator side, clear allocation of responsibilities, knowing very, very precisely who's supposed to be doing what. It cannot be emphasized enough that we need resource allocation adequate to the task, and we see all over the world examples of things being expected of bodies and agencies without the resource allocation being made available. Pooled funding that can be accessed according to function, clear recognition and enumeration of all the benefits, including the core benefits that we might see as being health security, but the co-benefits too: livelihood, sustainability, food safety, commercial opportunity, environmental sustainability, and many other possible co-benefits. And the last facilitator is incentive alignment. So when you're expected to make effort, and endure loss, it needs to be aligned with you having the opportunity to receive the returns from that. And it follows that the barriers are misalignment between capacity and the incentive to implement. So I want this thing done, but I don't have the capacity, or I've been told to do it, but I don't have the capacity, or I have the capacity, but nobody's allowing me to do it. These are all situations that are obviously not going to produce the outcomes that we're looking for. Inadequate and imbalanced resource allocation for the joint task between sectors. We see in many countries that the human health sector is much better resourced to think about One Health problems than the animal health sector is, for example. Asymmetric control over resources, concentration of budgets in one sector, much more difficulty of accessing them in another, even if in principle that's supposed to be possible. We often see recognition of only the health security benefits, and therefore an undervaluing of the other benefits that One Health interventions can produce, and that causes a lack of incentive for those with those other objectives to play the game. Incentive misalignment, the opposite of alignment, where effort and sacrifice is expected in one group for the other's benefit, and misaligned regulatory strategies. And particularly, we often see that human health sectors are using a lot of incentive-based regulation, while animal health sectors are dependent far more on command and control type regulatory mechanisms. That makes it difficult to do things together. Next slide, please. So as Angus was saying, our One Health, our call to action is to understand and learn more about the mechanisms that are going to be supportive of One Health approaches. It's to propose the imperative, therefore, of a learning agenda in this area. We simply don't know enough about the compatibility between institutional mechanisms and different kinds of joint working to propose specific actions at this point. There's very little documentation of the experience of using different institutional mechanisms for One Health, and we suspect that this reflects that there's been little innovation and development of novel institutional mechanisms to support One Health globally, although there are some notable exceptions. So the learning agenda would trial novel institutional mechanisms to better understand their implications, and this could be done within a formal research framework, but it can also be done more informally, collating the insider experience, comparing countries that are doing different things, and observing outcome variables that are available to look at, like the extent to which mechanisms are preventing the incidence and prevalence of endemic zoonoses, or just the extent to which they're enabling clear activity, implementing and operating preventative mechanisms. And of course, it's going to be really important to make sure that these mechanisms and the learning agenda from them align with the JEE and PVS monitoring protocols so that we can better predict health security outcomes than it seems we've been able to do in the past. The next slide, please, Angus. So we've tried to make the case that developing improved understanding of institutional mechanisms for One Health is the missing link needed to allow a substantially increased role for the approach, increasing its sustainability, broadening its impact, and boosting its cost effectiveness, alongside recognizing the importance of pandemic preparedness, which the world is clearly doing, and preventing and investing the resources that it needs, which I think is increasingly recognized as important. What's going to be absolutely critical is working out how to use those resources most effectively for the task in hand. And we think that would change the game in terms of the extent to which we can operationalize this set of important ideas. Thank you very much.
All right, we would like to thank Professor Barbara and Associate Professor Angus for the session. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to continue the webinar with the panel discussion session of tonight. And the session will be led by a moderator who has been working in the international development for 49 years, including 33 years managing human development, both health and education programs at a senior level. He studied physics at Cambridge University. He holds an MBA from the University of Wales, where he won the prize for the best student. And he was also awarded the Vietnam Health Medal for his contribution to HIV/AIDS control. Please welcome Team Leader Australia-Indonesia Health Security Partnership, Mr. John Lee.
Thank you very much, and I hope everybody can hear me all right. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you in different parts of the world. We now move into a panel discussion where we will have 6 very eminent panelists who are going to give their take on the presentation, this excellent presentation and very clear presentation that we have just heard from Professor McPeak and Dr. Campbell. So let me briefly introduce the panelists, and then we will move to them. So first up, we have a representative of the private sector, and that is Dr. Chakrapani Chatla. Dr. Chakrapani Chatla. He is a clinician and public health specialist and leads the Global Health Equity Collaboration at Thermo Fisher Scientific. Excuse me just a minute. Thank you. So he is a graduate in medicine, a postgraduate in public health, and also in healthcare services management with nearly 2 decades of experience in public health and epidemiology. He's experienced in managing services in public health projects, research projects, and skilled in developing collaborations with government, NGOs, and international agencies such as WHO, UNICEF, and so on. He is a strong believer in establishing cost-effective, sustainable, and structured surveillance programs in a comprehensive and multidisciplinary approach. And his special interest areas include developing collaborations and multi-stakeholder partnerships towards building frameworks in achieving the goals of the One Health approach. Our second panelist, I'm sure, is not a stranger to most of us, Professor Nitish Debnath. He's a veterinarian and holds a PhD in virology at the University of Surrey, an MSc in tropical veterinary medicine from the University of Edinburgh, and had his postdoctoral training on non-specific immunity in Japan. He started his career with the development of livestock services in Bangladesh and moved to the Bangladesh Livestock Research Institute as a senior scientist. In his mid-career, he moved to academia as principal of the newly established Chittagong Government Veterinary College, which was later transformed into Chattogram Veterinary and Animal Sciences University, where he was appointed the founding Vice Chancellor. Since January 2020, he's been working as the team leader of the Fleming Fund Country Grant in Bangladesh. He's the author of more than 100 publications, and he served as president of the Bangladesh Veterinary Council and also the Agriculturists Institution of Bangladesh. He's an associate fellow of Chatham House Global Health. He was a core member of the Board of Governors of the Council of International Veterinary Medical Education. He played a key role in organizing the first international One Health conference in Chittagong in March 2008, and of course, many further conferences since then. He is also, of course, I think everybody knows him as one of the experts of the One Health high-level panel. So that is Professor Nitish Devnath. Our next panelist is, I think in order of speaking, we would probably go next to Dr. Enki Engtufshinshile-Gdamba. I don't know if I've pronounced your name correctly, but Dr. Enki is a Mongolian veterinarian with MPVM degree. Since 2007, she has been working at the Wildlife Conservation Society Mongolia program as a veterinary and wildlife epidemiologist, and from 2016 as the country program director. She leads projects on peste des petits ruminants, PPR outbreak, and response on saiga antelopes and other wild ungulates in Western Mongolia, foot and mouth disease interface research between Mongolian gazelle and livestock in Eastern Mongolia, avian influenza surveillance in wild migratory birds in collaboration with UC Davis and local national partners leading in One Health. Our next panelist would be Sitaramachandra Machiraju from the World Bank. He's a senior agricultural economist at the World Bank. And since joining the World Bank in 2006, he has supported programs in Afghanistan, Cambodia, India, Indonesia, Laos PDR, Nepal, Pakistan, the Philippines, Sri Lanka, and Vietnam. He has knowledge and expertise in agriculture and rural livelihoods, agribusiness, and financial sectors. He leads a portfolio of lending projects and analytical works focusing on sustainable and modern food systems, One Health and food safety, climate-smart agriculture and green investment funds, private capital mobilization in Southeast Asia and Mongolia. Sitaramachandra is currently developing a regional program for preventing pandemic risks in East Asia and the Pacific around One Health. Sitaramachandra started his career with India's National Bank for Agriculture and Rural Development. In 1988, he played a key role in laying the foundation for successful microfinance in India before moving to the Society for Elimination of Rural Poverty as program director, leading one of the largest microfinancing programs in the world. He holds a Master's of Business Administration from Said Business School in Oxford and a Master's in Management Studies from Benares Hindu University. Our next panelist is Dr. Anna Okello. Anna is the Research Program Manager for Livestock Systems at the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research. She is also an academic fellow at the University of Edinburgh Medical School, a senior editor for Kabi One Health, and a Lancet Commissioner for One Health. She has almost 20 years research and management experience in international livestock development and public health programs with roles in international non-government organizations, the World Health Organization, University of Edinburgh, and the Australian government. An Australian veterinary graduate, Anna has a PhD in political science from the University of Edinburgh Centre for African Studies and maintains a strong research interest in policy approaches to One Health operationalization in the Indo-Pacific region. And last but not least, Our final distinguished panelist is my own colleague at AIHSP, the Australia-Indonesia Health Security Partnership. John is a veterinary epidemiologist and project manager working as an independent international consultant for more than 20 years. He's a fervent believer in the need to take broad approaches to solving complex problems and the need to move from disease-specific programs to the promotion of health in its broadest sense, including the One Health approach. Special interest areas including moving beyond the technical solutions to developing soft leadership skills and the development of emergency management systems for more effective responses. He worked in animal health and One Health delivery for a range of international organizations, including FAO, OIE, World Bank, ADB, and for the Australian and New Zealand governments. He is chair of the OIE PVS Ad Hoc Working Group, and he is leader of the current G7 quadripartite initiative One Health Intelligence Scoping Study, which is seeking to develop systems for better utilization of information for early warning and risk assessment. So that is the introduction to our very eminent panelists. And now we will move to the panel discussion. We will give each panelist approximately 10 minutes. And I believe first up we have Dr. Chakrapani Chatla, and Dr. Chakrapani has some slides which he will also share. So over to you, Dr. Chakrapani. This screen is yours.
Yeah,
do you want to share your slides, or would the Secretariat do that?
No, they can share, no problem.
Okay, so if the Secretariat could kindly put up his slides. Over to you, sir.
Yeah.
I will remind you when you have 2 minutes left.
Sure. Thank you, John, for this, for inviting me to speak first. I mean, of course, there are the other speakers are like very eminent speakers, and then I actually wanted to learn more from other speakers as well. Yeah, I mean, anyway, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to present Thermo Fisher Scientific, the world leader in science, to the August audience. Thank you, Professor Barbara and Dr. Angus, for the eloquent keynote addresses. We feel proud to be part of this initiative, joint action in One Health approach, and would like to present our expertise in diagnostic perspective, basically, towards achieving the goals of One Health initiative. Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, I mean, as you see in the slides, we take pride in our mission of enabling our customers in making the world healthier, cleaner, and safer. As you are aware, we interact with more than millions of customers annually and share our expertise in deep technical knowledge and applications. We strive to serve as trusted laboratory advisor and a partner in bringing innovative solutions and improving digital capabilities. If you can see the way we have expanded our services across the globe with so many employees and scientists and specialist engineers, especially working in various human, animal, and agricultural health issues, especially within the APJ region itself. We have nearly 80 scientists and more than 200 field service engineers, besides hundreds of other staff. I mean, this is what actually we thought we will bring across the table, as the previous speakers and eminent speakers yesterday were actually trying to emphasize that it needs One Health approach, needs actually interdisciplinary coordination, and then sharing of knowledge, technical knowledge across the partners in the game. Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, in this context of One Health initiative, we bring across the table an established track record of providing timely response to various zoonotic diseases over 2 decades. If you see the initial work in around 2003 with Newcastle diseases till COVID-19, you can clearly find how we evolved in serving the zoonotic diseases and other key diseases which are part of One Health approach over a period of time. You can see in this slide, we feel proud to inform that we provide high quality and high throughput solutions in affordable range. That's more critical, especially for One Health approach, which it does not happen overnight. It required around 5 decades of quality investment in animal health research. We strive hard for innovative solutions to develop accurate, accessible, and end-to-end solutions, utilizing various technological platforms, like whether it is next generation sequencing or automated workflows like ion ampli-seq for Ebola, or qPCR solutions for COVID we have seen recently. So many things are required actually to bring across the proper structured diagnostics into the partnership, because as we know, like prevention is better than cure. So if we identify diseases at the early stage and identify appropriately with the existing resources, so that would actually pave way for successful integrated approach across the partners. Yeah, next slide, please. When the COVID outbreak began in late 2019, we know like the situation how the world faced, like we didn't know like what exactly to do in terms of diagnosis, what exactly to do in terms of managing this new issue across the globe. And then Thermo Fisher Scientific actually rose to that occasion, and then we started developing the first COVID-19 diagnostic test, which has now scaled to the level of manufacturing 25 million tests per week. So we reached to that level now, and we are working on standardizing and industrializing the manufacture of tests and testing platforms in a reliable and reproducible way to support the global need. You can find in the slide, like globally over half of the all COVID-19 testing is currently happening on our instruments. And then we have rapidly increased our production of COVID-19 kits, and now we are in a position, like if necessary, within every week we can provide 25 million reactions. Like that much of establishment has already been prepared. The ground is ready to utilize for any disease now. So and the most important is, like we have our trusted sources, like for providing assured supply to ensure there are no concerns in workflow or throughput. Like the supply chain mechanisms are very well established, so we can at the global standards. So basically the point I would like to share is the capability of Thermo Fisher Scientific in leveraging its scale and resources for replication in One Health approach. So towards achieving this, like we can see, we can contribute from isolation of a new variant to surveillance of various zoonotic diseases. So towards that, various technologies are required, whether it is NGS, whether it is capillary electrophoresis for mutation verification, whether it is for genetic surveillance, or real-time PCR for isolation and detection. In the slide is self-explanatory, in which you can see like how the data is generated across various platforms, and then what is the cost effectiveness across the platforms. So considering that, next slide, please. Yeah, so if you see, if I put like as an example, COVID as an example, and then put it across the audience, like how we can actually use the combination of solutions available currently for an effective surveillance program development. So here you can see like we have multiple options in terms of technology, for whether it is surveillance, next generation sequencing and capillary electrophoresis, or whether it is for detection, RT-PCR, or whether it is mutation identification, capillary electrophoresis and RT-PCR, etc. And then so there may be n number of solutions out there in the market, but what is very important is to use the right tools for surveillance in cost-effective manner, to be efficient and sustainable over long run, which is even more critical when it comes to One Health approach. As we know, like that's what we have been deliberating from yesterday. Not all the programs are well funded. We know like some of the human health programs are very well funded. Some of the human health programs themselves are not very well funded. Leave aside animal health and agricultural health programs. So that's where like we need to choose what are the efficient ways out of the available resources in getting maximum benefit out of the technology. So that's where the characteristics like superior sensitivity, simple workflow, rapid results, and integrated analysis plays pivotal role in decision making. So we saw in the COVID-19 response, though there are multiple high-end technologies are also available, effective surveillance was actually possible only with lower cost, high turnaround, very fast turnaround time technologies. Like if you see in US, only 5% of SARS-CoV-2 positive samples are analyzed for variants because of the limitations of NGS, which has high cost and lower capacity and slow turnaround time. Next slide, please.
You have 2 minutes
Yeah,
remaining.
yeah, it's over. So basically, like whether we use high throughput or low throughput methods, or if the throughput suddenly is increased due to an outbreak, basically we have various solutions available which are simple to run, highly efficient. You can see in major farm animals also we have PCR diagnostic kits, whether it is for optimizing testing using various master mix options, and then whether it is extraction and nucleic acid purifications kits. In summary, basically what I'm trying to present to the August body is, see, there are various technologies available. We need to choose based on their advantages and cost effectiveness. See, we can use like kind of PCRs for early warning systems, or capillary electrophoresis for surveillance, and NGS maybe for a highly efficient analysis of the virus in total, or the bacteria in total, etc., for various genotics. So, and as I remember from the 5 pillars of successful One Health approach elaborated yesterday by Dr. Kevin Olival, what I feel like out of the 5 pillars, at least 3 pillars Thermo Fisher can contribute successfully using our expertise and then existence across the globe. Those 3 pillars are basically massive scale up in surveillance. Second is data sharing, because all our instruments, most of them are like automated report generating systems. So wherein we don't need to rework on data collation and analysis. And then third is like probably we can contribute more on research networking and workforce training, etc. Next slide, please. On behalf of Thermo Fisher Scientific, I would like to thank you all and for the opportunity, and hope to serve to achieve the desired purpose in the implementation of One Health policy as a trusted partner across the globe, and specifically the host country Indonesia for this year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chakrapani, and thank you so much. You kept exactly on time. So thank you very much for that. And thank you for giving your perspective on the private sector contribution, which is always important for us to remember. Thermo Fisher Scientific is one of the major providers of equipment and technology which can be used across all of these sectors in building and strengthening the One Health approach. So thank you very much. Thank you very much. For our next panelists, I'd like to invite Professor Nitish. Over to you, sir. The floor is yours, and you will have up to 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, John, and thank you very much for inviting me to be here. And also, I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to the two keynote speakers. I was so impressed to see the very original thinking in their presentation. And what I would like to do, that I'd like to really pick up 3 points from their presentation. One, the One Health joint working. Second, well-developed One Health initiative that deliver co-benefits on top of the health security. And third, One Health technical initiative supported by appropriate financing. They have presented a lot of things, but these are the 3 important points that I would like to highlight with the experience from Bangladesh. And as all we know that, working together is the heart of One Health. And we started our One Health journey in Bangladesh in 2008. And 2 important emerging infectious diseases, such as Nipah viral infection in humans and bird flu of highly pathogenic avian influenza in poultry, they have been the inspiration for introducing One Health approach in Bangladesh. And most importantly, this One Health approach that we started in 2008, it has grown very organically, not driven by donors nor by the government. And also to mention that, even then, during that time, the tripartite was not existing. The power and energy comes from the awareness of cross-sectoral professional people. The story was like this. Some poultry farmer came to us in the Chittagong Veterinary and Animal Science University to get a solution from avian influenza. Avian influenza not only killing the birds, but also it is impacting their business, because people are not interested to eat the meat, because it was a sort of scary thing. And then we started to communicate. And this is the important thing, that how communication really play an important role. And we started to communicate with our faculty member, and then moved to outside the university to talk with the public health people, veterinarians, wildlife experts, including some important institutions like Institution of Epidemiology and Disease Control, ICDRB, Department of Livestock Service, Forest Department, even some of the activist groups like environmental, we call BAPA, Bangladesh Environmental Movement, and how to work in this sort of interface. And those discussions basically led to organize a conference in Chittagong in March 2008, and we made a Chittagong Declaration on One Health and launched a membership-based One Health platform, what we call One Health Bangladesh. And since then, this platform has been organizing a conference, the last conference, the 10th conference we organized in 2019. Along with conferences, we did a lot of advocacy activities, seminar, dialogues, workshop. One of the milestones of our initiative was to develop a One Health strategic framework and action plan in 2012, which was later on, approved by the government. So, 15 years of our One Health journey under the banner of One Health Bangladesh is now an active community of practice, part civil society organization, part think tank. It mobilizes professional networks spread across many institutions to advance One Health agenda, convince collaboration at national, regional, and international level, secure endorsement from the previously desperate experts. There is a regular engagement with the government agencies. It has set a goal of promoting a whole of a society movement for One Health in Bangladesh. Now, this is one experience that we call a community-led One Health, movement or activities. Simultaneously, we work with the government partners to get approved the strategic framework. And in that strategic framework, there is an instrument of One Health governance or coordination mechanism. And 3 ministries approved this thing: Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, Ministry of Fisheries and Livestock, and Ministry of Environment and Forest. And with that endorsement in 2016, a government formally established a One Health Secretariat. As Professor Flora was mentioning yesterday, the Institute of Epidemiology and Disease Control Research, with a seconded officers from the Department of Health, the Department of Livestock Service and Forest Department, and a sort of coordination, One Health Secretariat coordination was established that. And 2 other set of coordination mechanism. One is the National Technical Advisory Committee, engaging all the agencies head and other stakeholders. And the last one, which is at the top, establishment of Interministerial Steering Committee. And One Health Secretary is now, as I mentioned earlier, the One Health Bangladesh. Now, the second platform, that is One Health Secretariat, has become a functional body to support the One Health activities across human, animal, forest, environment. It identified, these terms of reference, prioritized zoonotic diseases with support of PNR project from USAID. And since 2016, it has been working with a goal to establish a whole of a government approach for One Health. You remember yesterday, Professor Flora very clearly mentioned that time, and we got a lot of advantage out of this secretariat. And we have revised One Health strategy framework and action plan in 2017, and it is going to be revised again in this year. So these 2 platforms, it is not just platform I'm sharing with the global community. Most important thing is these 2 platforms working in a very collaborative way. Our experience shows community-led One Health and government-led One Health together can make a big difference. And working together, it is more sustainable, effective, vibrant. And Bangladesh has a similar experience in successful EPI, or that is called Expanded Program for Immunization. And this is how I think Bangladesh is working as a community. So this is an experience of joint working together. There are all other details I'm not going to mention. But I just want to pick up another thing, the co-benefits on top of the health security. And I will be, explaining three donor-dependent, funded projects here. One is since 2020, we have been working in Framing Fund contingent, and that is also devoted to the One Health approach and integrated AMR surveillance development. And that benefit goes not only to human health, animal health, aquaculture sectors, and One Health governance system to mitigate the AMR burden across all sectors, provide a lot of supports to lab capacity building, not only on the human health side, also on the animal health side and aquaculture all together. And the money pot is in one place, but benefit going to across all these sectors. This is one example. Another sector, another example in Bangladesh that we are experiencing, One Health Poultry Hub that is also supported by UKRI and supported multi-country grant, but Bangladesh is doing very well with this One Health Poultry Hub project and dealing with stopping spillover from the poultry to human, AMR containment, safe food production. More importantly, it is not only the scientists who are dealing this thing from across the discipline, but they are engaging a lot of farmers community, industrial, policymakers as a whole. It is becoming a sort of platform of scientists, producers, consumers, and as well as practitioners. This is another example. Money is coming from one pot, but spreading in other areas. And third thing, that is the human capacity. That is FETP-V, FETP, and recently we are developing another what we call wildlife and biodiversity. And the last point that I would like to mention, the One Health financing from the government side. This One Health coordinated program, that is what we call the coordination mechanism I mentioned earlier. Bangladesh government from the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, this is one channel, but supporting to multiple sectors with an operational budget from their own funding. One Health surveillance, joint outbreak investigation, One Health dashboard, etc. at One Health Secretariat, financed separately, but as a joint activities. And this, there are three departments which have seconded their officers to One Health Secretariat, funding coming from three different agencies, but working in one place together. A mass dog vaccination program for rabies control, financed by the human health side, very interestingly, but very cooperatively and active engagement with the Department of Livestock Service for effective implementation. This is a technical part of these things. And all this, financing mechanism that we are currently working on the government, basically without making any change of the existing system. Here is the point that I think we need to make some sort of effort or new initiative convincing the politicians, policymakers that the older system of financing in a silos may not be very effective for One Health functioning. And for that reason, we need to find a new ways. And for that thing, what can be done? We need to negotiate with the policymakers, with the politicians. Also, I would emphasize that the development partners should also work here. World Bank-like organizations, USAID, other agencies, those who are funding very heavily in different One Health areas in country and national level, they should also advocate and develop a sort of evidence-based financing system at the country level. And then I think One Health will really vibrate and move ahead. John, I think I am within the time. I can finish that here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Nitish, and really interesting experience. I think, Bangladesh is one of the leading countries in terms of, actually making the One Health operational. So thank you very much. By the way, to all of the participants and attendees, we have a Q&A here. After the panelists have spoken, we will have a question and answer session. But as the panelists are speaking, please feel free to start posing some questions in the Q&A box. And then when we come to the question and answer session, hopefully we will have some questions that are all ready to go. So thank you very much again, Professor Nitish. And now I would like to move to Dr. Enki from Mongolia. Dr. Enki, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm very honored to be part of this panelist group representing wildlife sector, especially wildlife health focus. I'm epidemiologist working in the environmental sector in the last 15 years. So from my experience from the field, I would like to highlight the importance of integrated One Health system, about which our keynote speakers discussed and highlighted the importance. Most countries, especially Mongolia, when they talk about One Health, they incorporate livestock health and human health. And in most cases, they leave out wildlife health or environmental focus. And WCS, Wildlife Conservation Society in Mongolia, basically trying to fill in that gap, and we're trying to highlight the importance of biodiversity and the importance of environment in the One Health approach. So I would like to describe some field experiences, how we were able to establish One Health approaches in Mongolia based on wildlife mass die-offs. So we all know that pandemics lead to human and livestock health risks and to loss. However, pandemics can lead to a loss and species extinction of biodiversity, which is a very critical issue. And in most cases, wildlife loss is not considered as an important matter or issue, or it's not a high importance to respond and to prevent. So in most of proactive One Health approaches, we're trying to highlight that biodiversity, especially proactive bottom-up One Health approach, incorporating and integrating wildlife health into human and livestock health is important. For example, in Mongolia, we have successfully implemented One Health teams in responding to highly pathogenic avian influenza surveillance and monitoring, especially early detection, because when there was in 2005 the first wild bird mortality, the veterinary and human health experts reported the species wrongfully. So they couldn't even detect the type of birds that have been affected. So we started in the field training local experts, zoonotic disease and livestock health experts in properly identifying the biodiversity. And also properly reporting the species. And also because of the global importance and the migration routes going through Southeast Asia, from Central Asia to Europe, it is important to early predict, because these migrations happen within a month, and outbreaks that occurred in China, Mongolia, can be transferred to Europe in a matter of a month, or could be even 2 or 3 weeks. So from COVID, we see that we cannot be blind-sighted, whether it's the outbreak in Africa, in Asia, in North America. We never know when it will be arriving in our doors. So this experience in avian influenza surveillance has established really good integrated system in Mongolia. And further on, we had in 2016 a PPR, peste petite ruminants outbreak in Saiga antelopes. It is the first PPR outbreak in wild populations, leading to mass die-offs. We lost almost 80% of the Saiga antelopes in Mongolia, which this event only within 3 months canceled 12 years of conservation efforts. Again, we established at local level, incorporating livestock health experts and also environmental experts in responding, early detecting to the wildlife die-offs. And I would like to highlight establishing these systems, especially integrated systems, is challenging because we need to have financial resources available. We need to train extensively these professional capacities, especially when there is wildlife health unit or agency is non-existing in certain countries. So it requires dedication and passion of local professionals, either it's a veterinarian or ranger. They have to have a passion to respond, to early detect the biodiversity. And I would like to highlight that it is a very important to establish proactive system, including the local communities, because wildlife die-offs are not visual. It's difficult to detect. So we are training local herders on reporting, collaborating with the One Health professionals. So it is actually a bottom-up approach that is leading to that is incorporating even local herders and communities into reporting, early detection, and timely response. I don't know if I'm over my 10 minutes, but these were examples that we have established successfully in Mongolia. Unfortunately, these established systems do not continue after the project funding is finished. For example, the highly pathogenic avian influenza One Health team was established under the PREDICT project in partnership with UC Davis. But when the project finishes, the active surveillance, research monitoring finishes. Luckily, we have a very enthusiastic team in place at the Saiga Range. The veterinarians and the rangers are actively working on detecting the disease in the wildlife and reporting. And we have a very good national capacity to diagnose wildlife samples at the State Central Veterinary Laboratory. So we're having a really great support from national agencies, and the National Veterinary Authority recognizes the importance of biodiversity in One Health. And now they are establishing a working group focusing on wildlife, integrating wildlife health surveillance and data collection incorporation into the National Veterinary database. So there, I think a majority of countries now using spatial monitoring reporting tool, which is a ranger-based or national park-based monitoring system for biodiversity. And within using this smart system, we can detect or report biodiversity loss, mass die-offs. This data and information can be now integrated into the livestock disease system at national level. So we are working on integrating wildlife data into the national system, which is going to be a really great step. But unfortunately, this is only between the environmental and the veterinary system, because these diseases are not zoonotic. However, if it's not zoonotic, it is still leading to about 2 billion livestock, or for example, in a PPR case, it causes $2 billion economic loss, over 300 million rural families globally per year. So it is a very important food safety, food security, and livelihoods risk. But unfortunately, there is no established national One Health integrated full system incorporating human health, livestock health, and wildlife health yet. So we look really looking forward to incorporated integrated system. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Enki. You are just within your time, which is fantastic. Thank you very much indeed for the experience of Mongolia. Let's move on and let us hear the viewpoint from a very experienced economist from the World Bank. So I'll hand over to you, Situ Ramachandra Machiraju, and the screen is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. John and fellow panelists. Yesterday and today, I think we have been having very insightful, exciting conversations. And I was at loss of words when I was hearing Enki the last, because just 3 days back I returned from Mongolia. We were trying to get in touch with her last week. So it's good that we are connected now.
Thank you.
In fact, I should also thank Barbara and Angus to make very provocative and very insightful presentation, which actually moves the people who are engaged in One Health to see the problem in perspective. My takeaway from the presentation was that it is more than the technical stuff. It is more about human mind and behavior. 3 people coming together, working together. No, 3 teams coming and working together. Not even teams, it is 3 sectors coming and working with each other. And then each of them come up with their own attitudes, norms, behavioral traits. And then they are bound up by the institutional structures and processes which prevent the science to come into play. That is my understanding. But even though one of the point which Professor Barbara made was that the scientific personnel or scientific traits sometimes create barrier. My reading after working in Southeast Asia and East Asia, particularly Mongolia, China, Laos, Cambodia, and then other countries in this region, I believe that One Health problem is again a function of the variety of governance, variety of capitalism each country chooses. So there can't be one strategy or one solution fits for all. But still, where do we start? I again believe that One Health chain is as strong as its weakest link. Recognizing that weakest link and supporting that weakest link is very, very important. And that's where the misalignment of incentives or asymmetries in the power and control over relationships, resources, is what Barbara was mentioning. And I would want to pick up from the last slide. I thought the solutions, whatever we are talking about, lies in removing those barriers. And those barriers are critical barriers. If we can work out strategically, perhaps we will be able to come up with very, very innovative solutions, very native solutions, right? And I have worked in the water and sanitation, the nutrition sectors, before I moved to the so-called livestock and the agribusiness standpoint, where I learned from what Mr. Nitish was mentioning from Bangladesh, the community-led total sanitation or community-led nutrition, community-led health. So basically what has happened is the communities were shown the benefit of their actions. So that is the reason the local actions thrived. Unless and until we create benefit and align the incentives of the local communities, I don't think the centralized or the global approaches would work. So looking at a local action is important. If the local action is not done properly or in time, then you have a cost of global inaction, which is, we are talking about trillions and trillions of dollars which have been lost. So the idea is, if we are now trying to strengthen the One Health initiative, bringing not only 3 sectors, but also recognize that it is a multi-level, multi-domain, and multi-sector problem. So aligning all of them together is a solution, which I think it is only in the heavens you'll find. So we need to find out very, very innovative and very cross solutions so that we can try to work with each other and support each other and then try to create incentives for each other. Now the question is, what is the problem like? The problem is about the connections between the politics, the policy, and the scientific knowledge, which is the weakest when it is coming to the One Health. But we need to bridge it. And for bridging it, bringing significant knowledge and evidence would be very helpful, and bridging the communication gaps between the different stakeholders. So risk communication and communication is very important. I think Enki was trying to mention that how they were able to work with the local herders, communicate with them the risk, and then the local herder communities were mobilized, right? So that is something which we need to do it more systematically. And there are a good number of examples in Southeast Asia, which we can try to learn from the decentralized or the community governance models. Again, when we talk about the resources, the first thing comes to our mind is the resources which have to come afresh, or the additional resources, the incremental resources. But when you try to look at each of the sectors, which we have been trying to analyze, I think Anna would also be able to bear me out. When we are trying to look at their allocation of resources, where exactly these resources are deployed and for what purposes? Is it on prevention, detection, response, or recovery? You'll find that most of the sectors do not deploy the resources in the prevention side as is needed. So basically, we are also talking about then moving the resources or repurposing the existing public resources towards the prevention and detection, so that you will be able to get larger returns from the public investments which we are making. Then finally, then there is also a idea about why a poor country should, or a community level or commune or a local government should bear the cost of a global public good. So aligning incentives at each level, at the community level, at the local governance level, at the province and the national level, is very, very important. What is a trick? Where do we bring out? I think some sort of nuancing is required. And I believe that there are examples in each of the sectors where they have been able to solve this. It's a question of bringing them together. Now, still, the problem is about the arguments you would want to make for additional resources. For that, we require some sort of evidence and data so that we can ask the financing or the investors or even the governments to allocate resources. So for that, some sort of a good data analysis is required so that we can try to quantify the impact and then explain the benefit in the manner where you are able to attract capital. And that capital can be deployed in the areas where we were talking about, which is the weakest link. Let us try to understand. But fundamental thing, I think, for all of us who are working in these sectors is to recognize that animal, human, environment connections are important. Use them, address them in upstream in the public health systems, so that we are able to address the zoonotic, EID risks, or even the food safety and the AMR kind of risk, right? So, but basically the current paradigm for addressing zoonotic risk is mostly reactive. So what do we do to make it more towards the preventive side, right? So basically, if you are able to convert this future good to a present benefit, perhaps it will make more sense for the mainstream sectors. I can take an example of the livestock sector. In the livestock sector, there are good number of nature-based solutions, sustainable livestock initiatives, good animal husbandry practices. All of them mean money in the market. They carry premiums. And if this is done well, it is not only creating healthy economy, healthy animals, and also healthy planet. So how do we bring this kind of convergence in ideas is basically going back to the roots, recognizing that whatever we do is about good, and that good is reflected to the local communities. Then you can charge the local communities to take action in the current the right point in time. Finally, one last idea which I would want to place here is all about the technology. When we are talking about the capacities, the institutional systems and connections between different sectors, if technology can help, it's a question mark again, if the technology can help perhaps some of the behaviors can be reformed, even though there is a challenge about the data sharing. In fact, that was also presented in the presentation by Barbara and Angus. But I believe that technology can bring in efficiency, it can bring in more transparency, it can bring in accountability, but more importantly, it can deliver One Health outcomes at the local level in the most efficient manner. And I think that's what Chakrapani was trying to present when he was trying to talk about the technology, and then the private sector can come in. So I would again bet on the technology and the private sector as much as the convergence between the three sectors. So I stop at that. Thank you so much. I'll be able to take any question which is coming along. Thank you. I think I'm ahead of time.
Okay, first of all, we would like to thank all of the panel of speakers. Thank you so much for presenting tonight. However, unfortunately, we got the information that our moderator is not in the Zoom meeting because of the connection issue. So please stay tuned because we are going to continue the event. Shortly. In this occasion, we also would like to remind all of the participants to fill out the attendance list as well as the evaluation form and the attendance form that has been sent in the chat box. So feel free to give us the input so that we can do our next event better.
Rizky?
Yeah.
Sorry, we have one more speaker, Dr. John Weaver.
Go ahead. I think Dr. John, maybe later John Lee will be coming back.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to speak now, but I'm also aware that according to the sort of sequence of introductions, that Dr. Anna Okela was sort of going up in front of me. I'm happy to go first up, but Anna, I'm also happy to offer the microphone to you.
That's fine, John. Feel free to go first, no problem.
All right, thanks, Anna. So with your permission, obviously losing our moderator, but we're happy to continue. That's great. So thank you very much, everybody, for the invitation to participate in this panel. And I think already in both yesterday's discussion sessions and today, I think it's been really insightful and really interesting. I've rewritten my notes multiple times and I now can't read them at all, so that's rather unfortunate. So it's going to be flying as we go. I think starting at the beginning, the presentation from Barbara and Angus was really apt and opportune, and as referenced by a number of the panelists, demonstrates the logic of where we're at and where we need to think about going. What I'd like to do is just focus in on those little cogs that Angus and Barbara highlighted and think through that and give you perhaps some examples of some experiences I've had. So if we think about those cogs, the logic of that obviously is coordination. One Health is all about coordination. And that's fundamentally, as we had demonstrated, that communications as a starting point, moving on through collaboration into integrated programs. Why are we not achieving that more efficiently, more effectively? And I think the fundamentals of that are that we're not using, a little bit as my esteemed colleague Sita mentioned just now, this logic of we are tending to be a bunch of technocrats. We understand the technical issues, we understand the technical solutions. Many times the technical solutions are relatively straightforward, but we neglect the broader context. We neglect the broader context of the socioeconomics, the politics, the drivers. And I think one of the fundamental problems we have is, and this is referenced in scientific literature in many other contexts, is that and it was referenced again by the plenary presentation at the beginning, as we become more specialist and more skilled at our specializations, we tend to become less skilled at advocacy, at communication, at engagement, at platforming. And I think without addressing that problem, we will always struggle. We'll never get beyond sort of first gear or whatever. And I think there's a fundamental element that we need to address in that. And that comes from a number of different points. And I want to just describe a couple of activities that I've been involved with that start to address that. So one of those points is that we need that evidence, that logic of what we're trying to sell, to advocate to our political masters. And as was referenced just now by Sita and Professor Nietzsche as well, this issue of engagement at the community level and also other colleagues as well. So how do we get better information, better knowledge? So yes, we all want better surveillance. That's, you know, every epidemiologist wants better surveillance. But that's an endless desire, an endless request. It's never going to be perfect. So let's make better use, more efficient use, more effective use of the information we do have. So as was referenced in the introduction by John, I'm involved with this project under the quadripartite, which is called the One Health Intelligence Scoping Study. And Nitish with OLEP and things, we've had some meetings with you, so nice to see you again online. The logic of this scoping study is how can we look at this multiplicity of information systems that exist around the world in the different sectors that feed into One Health, and how do we bring those sectors together, that information together, to drive that integration across the sectors in a coherent way. So it's looking at scoping this multiplicity of data systems and bringing them up from a data system into information, and from that into intelligence. And from the intelligence logic, that then drives you into the opportunities for risk assessment, that feedback loop in terms of improving your surveillance systems, and early warning, the alerting systems. We all want to prevent the problems, but we will never be perfect at preventing them. So we have to retain that ability for early detection and response. So this project is looking at that. It's specifically looking at it at the quadripartite level. And it's great that we moved from the tripartite, the health-focused level, into something that's now including UNEP. And I think that's a great step forward. There are a lot of complexities about this, as you can imagine. If you look at any individual country, countries have multiple database systems. How do they operate within a country? This scoping project is looking at an international level. So the problem is obviously sort of amplified from that. But I think the development approach is looking really fruitful. We're getting a strong logic and a strong opportunity that is working with existing systems. It's not trying to replace everything with a perfect system at an individual sector level, at an individual country level. It's going to need to work with national systems and integrate them at the international level. So it's going to have to, again, one of the imperatives that's been pointed out before, those benefits, that benefit needs to come back at all levels of the user. Otherwise, these systems fail. So there's a logic to that. So I think this integration of intelligence or the promotion of intelligence systems using data and information is a really key element. And that then leads us into that platform of evidence for advocacy. And here I want to just acknowledge our hosts tonight in the sense of the government of Indonesia and their initiatives with the CISE logic, which is this coordinated platform across the sectors. And I think that's a great initiative. There's work to be done for sure in terms of bringing that home, in terms of being effective and efficacious. And these systems will never be perfect, but let's move in that direction. So I think evidence is really important. But then our ability to use evidence is critically important as well. And another initiative we've been involved with is a leadership program. So that's not looking just at the technical skills development. And if you look across the development scope, you'll see that most development programs focus on technical skills development. And we need to think higher than that. We need to think of these broader contexts, these opportunities, these delivery of benefits to the multiple levels, to our political leaders, to the decision makers, to the middle managers, to the communities. And we have to work with that. And that's a leadership skill in the sense of communication, understanding individual differences, social intelligence, motivation to change, constraints, drivers of change, this broad context of, if you like, soft leadership skills. And I think we really have to become better and more capable at this, using our technical basis to drive advocacy and change. So I think evidence, yes, that's really important, but then use of evidence is also critically important. That's communication in the broad sense. And then maybe just a couple of other examples. I've also been involved a lot, as you know, with the PVS program, with the Performance of Veterinary Services under OIE and now obviously WOAH, their new name. And that, I think, is a very strong program. But again, it tends to look at the technical levels. It looks to a level at chain of command and a level of management skills, and it brings in some One Health logics. But it doesn't really adequately bring in that higher level skill. So I think for us to be able to promote One Health more effectively, more efficiently, we need to bring those skills in. And these skills are not just at the technical health level, they're also at the economic level and the drivers of socioeconomics and change and opportunity. And if you look at some work that's being done through FAO at the moment on African swine fever, there's a lot of impetus and understanding about technical issues of diagnosis, using things like these modern diagnostic techniques, as were being promoted by our friend from Thermo Fisher, Dr. Chakrapani. So that's a great skill set to have, but we need to consider the context all the time. If we're trying to drive change, we have to understand that socioeconomic context, that political context, that opportunity, and from that, our decision makers are always going to be resource poor. They're going to look for cost. For cost benefit, we have to have a coordinated approach to that. So I think there's a strong logic there. And I think and it's not going to be a revolution overnight, but an iterative approach. And it's something that's been, emphasized. Some of the pilot studies, some of the countries that we've already heard from are in the lead in some of these. We need to cross-fertilize and learn from each other as efficiently and effectively as we can. And maybe just a final comment again about our host tonight. In response to the avian influenza outbreak in the 2004-5, the Comnas flu brung was established, which was a wonderful One Health national committee that looked at this cross-cutting coordination. That evolved some years later into the Comnas Zoonosis, the National Committee for Zoonoses. And again, that provided that governance steering committee, that mandate, that cross-cutting coordination. And that's now been assumed into one of the other ministries, this coordinating ministry within Indonesia. And, that's a natural progression, but I think we need to continue to promote these organizations that are sitting across the sectors rather than trying to leave the sectors to sit in their different parts of the compass and expecting that to coalesce together. We also have to remember, I think, that the ministries, and if we take particularly the three key ministries, but we can think also of others, that the three key ministries have different drivers. So the Ministry of Health will obviously be driven primarily by individual health, not so much by public health. The Ministry of Agriculture is not driven by animal disease. It's driven by productivity. It's driven by food security, economic development. Different driver. Ministry of Environment, also different, broad portfolio. Wildlife health, as we've heard from Dr. Henke, tends to get lost in the wilderness within the government portfolio. And then we have to think about the other ministries. We perhaps over-focus on these three, but we also need to think about ministries of education, maybe women's affairs, rural affairs, villages, commerce, trade. All these things come in because One Health is holistic. And that's one of the challenges with One Health, is that it's almost without bounds. So within that, we have to pick our targets. That logic of evidence and advocacy for change is, I think, the key pathway. It's relatively simple to say like that, it's a challenge for us all to actually achieve. Thank you very much. Back to you, John. Nice to see you back online.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, sorry, my apologies. I had a complete IT meltdown and I've had to rejoin using my phone because the laptop is not working. So anyway, these things happen. I think, so we still have Anna to go, right? Is that right? Yeah. Okay. So thanks very much, John. And sorry I missed a little bit of that, but let's hand over now to Dr. Anna Okello. Over to you. The screen is yours, Anna.
Thank you so much, John, for the introduction. And thank you to all the previous speakers this evening, and also to our wonderful MC, Rizky, who stepped in at a critical point. So always a sign of a good MC. Right, so tonight I'm going to reflect on two main points this evening, really based on the presentations we've heard, and I'm comforted that a lot of what I'm going to say has already been picked up by the various speakers. That's always good to know. But also some of my personal experiences of One Health implementation, working largely in the neglected tropical disease control programs. So coming from that perspective. So the first point that I'm going to make is really been raised several times tonight, which is great. And it's that investors and finances, whether public or private, are driven by this need to see a return on investment. But how do we do this when the costs and the benefits and the trade-offs for One Health are quite complex and not always directly attributable to individual agencies or entities? So as we know, many One Health advocates will say time and time again, a key feature of One Health is that if we cannot demonstrate the value addition of cross-sectoral working, then it's not really One Health, and we shouldn't be calling it that. So therefore, the business case for One Health needs to be super clear. What is the additional value that cross-sectoral working can provide compared to sectors tackling these issues independently? And that is really one of the key questions in terms of both implementation and financing for One Health approaches. So One Health, by its very nature, has to deal with really complex problems appearing at this intersection of numerous biological entities coming together. It's messy and it's complex, and our current global and national financing systems are in themselves, as Prof. Devnath outlined really eloquently, generally quite structured and organised. So they're not adequately set up to analyse and determine these more complex and messy cross benefits across sectors. So even if you look at national financing mechanisms, I work for a government, budgets are drawn down through line ministries from the Federal Treasury, individual agencies receive annual budgetary allocations based on essentially the cost benefit, either perceived or real, for what that money can actually achieve within that particular sector. What's our job that we've got to do for that year with that amount of money? So when I think of the places where cross-sectoral operationalisation has worked sustainably, it's been where dedicated structures and platforms exist that sort of supersede or sit above individual line ministries. For example, for countries that have offices of the Prime Ministers or those equivalents. And there's various examples of this in other cross-sector issues that I've seen before. So disaster response, for example, food security and nutrition. But without these high-level support structures, as others have said tonight, it really becomes difficult to move from that why One Health to the how. And as we've seen from the presentations tonight, there have been some really excellent suggestions put forward on how this could actually happen in practice moving forwards. Another really important consideration raised this evening in the context of One Health financing is that all stakeholders need to be aware of and agree on what I call the end game. By this, I mean the outcome or the vision for that investment. However, even with a joint vision, relative sectors involved all need to be clear on the particular costs, benefits, and trade-offs within their own sector, because importantly, they still have to report this information back to their managers and their ministers. And so here it's been touched on again tonight, but I want to diverge for a moment to discuss the case of animal biosecurity. You know, a global health system, as we've heard tonight, is only as strong as its weakest link. And in the case of emerging pandemics, veterinary systems and services are often held up as an example of that weakest link. However, when we think of financing that goes to animal health systems and services, various agricultural economics methodologies are usually applied to support that business case in those particular sectors. That is, the costs of animal disease are often shoehorned into narratives around production efficiencies, usually linked to formal trade markets, particularly in the case of a country like Australia, for example. So however, in the case of livestock, These types of productivity or commodity-based mindsets really risk ignoring these multiple intrinsic values of animals to society. For example, the role and function of livestock and livestock products to women's economic empowerment, to childhood education, to offsetting stunting and malnutrition in the food security space, serving as social capital, the reduction of manual labour, and also livestock are a huge mechanism for debt repayment, which is really, really important. So if we don't adequately capture these more holistic narratives when we talk about the costs of disease, or as I would rather frame it, the benefits of prevention, then we are missing an inherent part of the business case for investment in animal health and production systems. And that's to men, to women, and to society more broadly. So if we think around how we apply this more holistic view, the value of animal disease freedom is not just felt in the obvious ways around trade benefits and food safety, but you can start to look at these more, larger benefits to society as a whole, which allows us, of those of us that work in livestock, to make a better case for investment in animal health and production systems and services. So in concluding my first point, for the human, animal and environmental sectors to work together under One Health, the return on investment needs to be super clear. But I believe an important first step to achieving this is to actually get better at applying these more difficult non-monetary or intrinsic values of health, largely recognised and understood in human health economics, to the livestock environmental sectors as well. So that's my first point. My second and final point tonight is really stem from reflecting on, as I said before, work that I've done in the neglected tropical disease space, and really talking about how a paradigm shift is required from financing inputs to financing outcomes. So again, working in research, moving from pilots or research proof of concept to large-scale implementation requires, as we know, significant advance or upfront funding that's often not aligned with these more incremental project or program-based styles that come out of many public financing models. So this is particularly true for financing for One Health approaches for the control of neglected tropical diseases, which, as we know, the majority of which are either zoonotic or vector-borne, with some exceptions. So there's been some excellent pilots put forward for control of diseases such as human African trypanosomiasis, rabies, Taenius cysticercosis. However, it's really, really hard to get from that next step, from that proof of concept for how One Health is implemented on the ground, to scale out and scale up. And that's both in terms of human and financial resources. And I speak from direct experience trying to do this. So perhaps it's for this reason that the NTD community has been thinking about innovating financing mechanisms for some time. So I was first introduced to some of this thinking around newer or innovative mechanisms around 15 years ago when we worked on human African trypanosomiasis control in Uganda. And I think in general, there's a lot to learn from One Health approaches from the global neglected tropical disease community. And this was evidenced recently with the WHO's release of a One Health companion document to the new NTD roadmap to 2030. So just a quick classic example of One Health, rabies. And rabies, when examined from a cash flow perspective, what you want to do is take the R0 down, so how many secondary infections appear from a single infected case, take that R0 down to below 1. So high numbers of transmission or a high R0 leads to high annual costs of disease. And in the case of rabies, the brunt of the costs for this disease are borne in the human health sector in terms of post-exposure prophylaxis. So in order to get control of a disease such as rabies, you've got to hit that disease hard at the start, get that R0 down, and then maintain this lower level of disease status through continued surveillance and risk assessment, or what we deem maintenance costs. As the R0 reduces, so does the cash flow required to maintain these lower disease levels. And here is the caveat. If you want to progress from low levels of transmission to actual elimination, this is going to involve quite a large spike in funding to get that next step over the line. But in general, if we're happy to just have low levels of transmission, then the cost will decrease over time. But when we look at public financing mechanisms, a 10-year plus often plan, commencing with large amounts of upfront funding, is often at odds with how many national and international public financing mechanisms work. So this is an example of where innovative financing mechanisms, such as social impact bonds, could potentially harness the types of private sector investment models that routinely place large amounts of finance upfront, offering an opportunity to potentially add value and support to traditional donor-funded platforms or public sector government platforms. So quickly to explain the social impact model as one example of an innovative finance mechanism. There are many. This is the one that I've had experience thinking about. So the first actor in a social impact bond model is the government or donor agencies who are prepared to play the role of an outcome funder. These are public sector actors with a mandate for positive societal impact and change. And so we can think of lots of examples in One Health where we might think of some of these outcomes that need funding. The outcome funder is then partnered with a delivery partner, for an example, an aid agency or a research institute, that whilst it may have the evidence base for an effective intervention, such as a pilot or a proof of concept, and a way to monitor and evaluate these interventions, these aid agencies and research institutes don't necessarily have the required human or financial resources to deploy and analyse their proof of concepts and pilot successes at scale. And so we've got our public sector investor, you've got the implementing partner, the final partner to be brought in are the private sector investors. So these are a group of people or stakeholders motivated by societal change, and importantly, like most investors, willing to take a risk that their investment will prove successful. So to underpin these investments, it's necessary to identify robust and measurable results. And this is really, really important when we think of these types of innovative financing models. Those measurable, robust results act as indicators that societal change has indeed occurred. And so that's another thing that comes back into that question of return on investment. How do we prove that when we're working across sectors? So the resulting transfer of risk of operational failure from the public purse to the private investor is an important factor to take note in this particular example of social impact bonds. As I say, there's others, this is not the only thing. So if results are not reached, the private sector loses their money, same for any investment. But this drives the private sector investors to enforce rigour on the operational delivery to the benefit of the public investor that's keen on that social impact. So And that leaves this operational or implementing agency to focus on what they do best, which is stakeholder engagement, technical aspects, all those things that we've heard about tonight. So in this sort of model of an innovative financing approach, everyone is focused on success, but everyone is also at the same time very, very clear on their roles and responsibilities and the potential to return on their investment to their individual sort of institutes or agencies or sectors. So in this way, innovative financing mechanisms, for which there have been a number suggested for NTD control, such as rabies, human African trips, some of this stuff's in the literature, are well suited to supporting a One Health approach, I believe, with veterinarians, medical officers, environmentalists, and all the other sort of secondary and tertiary stakeholders that also benefit and have a role to play in One Health. They're all focused around this goal of payment for outcomes and that vision of what the outcome actually is for what we actually want under One Health. So in conclusion, encouraging private investment to provide upfront risk capital for One Health interventions, calling on public sector funders to repay capital plus a potential return once clearly defined and measured development outcomes are achieved, is an example of the types of innovative financing mechanisms that focus on outcomes rather than inputs. Then some of these could potentially show promise in the future. So getting back to my first original point, these financing mechanisms could also be a real catalyst for thinking around the how of One Health, particularly as applied to the roles, responsibilities, and return on investment that are necessary if we're going to drive this future support and investment into the approach. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Anna. And wow, this has been, really rich discussion with the 6 very different kinds of inputs from 6 really expert panelists. So thank you very much to all of the panelists. We have a few, just 3 questions at the moment that I can see in the Q&A. So please keep the questions coming. Before we get to those, I want us to sort of kick off maybe just with where Anna left off there, because Anna was really getting into the nitty-gritty of, innovative financing, financing that is geared to, paying for the outcomes rather than, other things that we often pay for. So I want to throw this back to some of the economists, first of all. Maybe we start with the World Bank. I mean, the World Bank has been moving increasingly towards payment by results or program for results financing. I don't know. I mean, Sita Ramachandra, would you like to make some comments? And then after that, maybe we could go to Barbara to get her comments. Sita, over to you.
Yeah, so I think that's a very interesting point. In fact, I was trying to send a chat to Anna, congratulating her to very nicely articulate the private sector solution. But in the public sector, we also have, as you mentioned, payment by results, or what we call program-based funding, program for results. And we also have an instrument called development policy finance. So basically, I was arguing for repurposing the public expenditure so that we not only strengthen the institutions, but also move them to look at more preventive sides so that there is greater efficiency of the capital invested and a better outcome result, right? So this requires some sort of a reform. It's a policy reform. It is again a mindset change, right? So perhaps we could use the policy instruments, policy finance instruments, so that you can reward the governments to take up measures which will allow them to move their public expenditures. Secondly, the expenditures which they're making, not necessarily as inputs, as Anna was mentioning, perhaps they could try to leverage these investments to crowd in the private capital and then drive the private capital to take legitimate interest and stake in the One Health outcomes. Again, there are instruments in conventional, we have the guarantees or payment mechanisms are there. But in addition to that, I'll try to tell you one interesting pilot which we're trying to do in China. It is about creating a food safety insurance model whereby the regulator and an insurance provider will partner, and the insurance provider would have a third-party agency which will actually try to go and monitor the gap or the HACCP compliance by the enterprises. And in case of any food safety failure, this entire value chain gets the indemnity for any failure, which is in terms of recall costs of brand failures and other things, right? So basically what we were trying to do was creating an incentive for an insurance company to mobilize resources and use insurance as a second regulator, more friendly to the market, and also creating market incentives rather than creating moral hazards there. So that is one opportunity we can try to look at how insurance companies can come. I'm sure if you're able to use food safety or food related insurance models, you have the consumer paying so that you are able to create an incentive. But in addition to that, what Barbara was mentioning, not Barbara, Anna was mentioning about the bonds. Bonds again is a good opportunity. We have green bonds, we have sustainability linked bonds, principles are there. The governments could be encouraged or the lead companies could be encouraged to raise resources. And then there could be some sort of underwriting or some sort of support could be given, whereby the public resources, precious public resources are used as a seed or to leverage the private financing and the other forms of capital. So these are the two things which I thought could be mentioned. But as you mentioned, there are also private based payment for results models are there. They're far and few, but the scale, if you would want to achieve at a regional level or at a global level, perhaps you need to look at more robust and scalable models, which I believe Barbara was mentioning is a way to go. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. And maybe we can pass to Barbara. I don't see Barbara on the screen, but I hope here we go. All right, yeah. Barbara, over to you. Your comments, please, on the sort of innovative financing. Yeah.
Okay, so I think one of the main things that Angus and I were trying to argue is that one needs to be discriminatory about what activity you're trying to encourage and support to identify the appropriate mechanism to do so. So if we take the idea of a social investment model or a social investment bond or whatever, where you're offering a prize for the achievement of some outcome, I think that might well work, or I think it's been shown to work quite well in relation to the private sector responding with the development of a product. That is, I don't know whether it's fair to say that's a relatively simple thing to motivate in a world where we failed to motivate a lot of those kind of product developments over a very long time. So maybe I shouldn't be dismissive like that, but it's a very concrete outcome, very easy to measure and therefore pay for. And then I think we can move into much more complex things like, how do we get remote rural farming systems to be generating data about avian flu, for example? Now, can you pay by result for that? I think it would potentially be extremely distorting. You might even create incentives for people to try and get avian flu into their flocks or something, so that they could get this. We picked it up and we won a prize. In other words, it's a more complex thing to measure, and therefore those kinds of instruments where you've got a very clear outcome and you can give a very clear reward are not necessarily going to work. If the actors who are going to we hope to encourage and support to do something are public sector actors, then again, where does payment enter into the public sector? And there are very many different sort of public sector cultures around the world, where you can have very innovative, money-chasing public sectors, and that can be a good or a bad thing. And you can also have very innovation-suppressing, very rule-based and not output-focused civil service cultures, which also serve their purposes. They're often derided, but there is a good reason why most civil services were set up to be that way originally. And so if you want to encourage some regulation, some appropriate supportive reporting of incidents of disease in animals, you might need to think more about some of the other kinds of mechanisms that we talked about, such as thinking about the employment culture. What is it that gets you promoted within the public sector? Can you encourage a sort of managed innovation within those sorts of structures? So I think the reason why we felt constrained from saying, so the solution is something like investment bonds, is I think we have to be much more nuanced about the many contexts and the many different kinds of things we're talking about under the One Health banner, and think more about how we make judgments about the right thing to do than jump to the right thing to do. And we need a huge evidence base to be able to do that, much bigger than 10 case studies of social investment bonds creating great incentives for drugs for neglected tropical diseases, for example. And that's why we're talking about this learning agenda rather than jumping to a particular solution. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Barbara. And whilst we're on the subject, I mean, we've been talking a bit about private sector investment. We do have a representative of the private sector here. So I'm just wondering if you have any views on this as a representative, Dr. Chakrapani, as a representative of a major private sector entity working in this space. What your views are in terms of, the way that the private sector might invest upfront to improve, the One Health outcomes. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I kind of like the conversation. It's flowing very well laid out by Sita sir and then Barbara. Basically, see, when it comes to private sector, of course, I mean, we all know, frankly, private sector looks for profit, but at the same time, there are thinking brains in the private sector also, where they try to create opportunities in terms of creating opportunity actually in a way try to help and find an innovative solution to the existing situations. So in that context, like if we limit to that kind of arena, so I can give you some examples. Like see, when COVID came up all of a sudden on the globe, and then we had some other equipment which were being used for TB, or which some of them were using for something else. So immediately, like somebody could identify, like, okay, what are the existing resources, like as Anna was also saying, and then from Bangladesh the experts was saying, like, so instead of trying to find new funding mechanisms, like we need to also think like, okay, what are the existing financial mechanisms available and technical resources available? Can we change with some modification, can we utilize for this new problem? So this kind of thinking goes in private sector too. Like basically, in that sense, actually, like detection of a new pathogen, or creating an opportunity or a platform for detecting new pathogen or a variant actually lies with the background thinking of what existing structures we can use. So beyond that, of course, sometimes we may really require innovative new technology itself, but most of the time, first initial pilots always happen with existing structures available. So we had examples of using TB machines for HIV testing or viral load. We had TB mechanisms for leprosy. So there are so many examples. Like even when I was part of community health earlier, when we developed various TB forums and HIV working groups for adopting the innovative either diagnostics or treatment methods into the community, we had to use existing systems. Like it's always existing resources need to be used towards developing something new. Of course, commercial sector will look into profits in those genre also, but then the responsibility shown are the technical skills and knowledge brought up into this whole comprehensive way of dealing a problem should not be forgotten. So that's how actually it's like collaboration of various sectors, whether it is for profit or not profit. Within the for profit and not for profit, like various technical streams, and then various groups who are working in animal health, human health, and agricultural health. All these needs to come together towards achieving this One Health goal. So I mean, that's how from private sector also it's been looked into. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much. So let's move into some of the Q&A that we have received. And in fact, I think two of these questions are quite related to one another. So the first question that I see on the list is, for One Health financing, how can countries better balance resource allocations across sectors, given very real competing priorities away from the dominant human health financing? And I think that the third question relates also to that, because it's about making a better economic case for One Health. So, obviously, if countries are going to allocate resources across sectors to different sectors, there needs to be an economic case for that. So, if panelists would like to respond to either or both of those questions, please go ahead. The floor is open, and I am including Barbara and Angus as panelists, as well as our 6 panelists. Who would like to go first?
Oh, John, can I just compliment to that?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I am just citing one example. One of our finance minister who was once upon a time a bureaucrat as well, and very recently has passed away. And we went to him to discuss about this particular issue of financing under this priority basis and competing each other. How can we really finance One Health in a proper way? And he was suggesting one thing that you are saying that they are thinking to develop a sort of clustering of the ministries, some of the related ministries, and a pot of money for that clusters can be allocated on a very priority basis, and then it can be utilized for One Health purposes. So this is what I mean. It has a long description and discussion and a lot of norms and problems with the bureaucratic procedure, but that is the gist of his proposition. And I find it, because there are some technical issues do come together, even when One Health didn't exist. People come together to get solution for some of the technical issues. But when it comes to the financial issue, it was always in the silo. And that is why we really suffered in some of the very technically soluble problem, but financially was not soluble. So this is one approach, whether we can make some sort of advocacy at some level. We are trying to do that, but a sort of clustering of the ministries to really finance the One Health program. And there should be one pot. And of course, as Barbara as well as Angus mentioned, it is not just distribution of the money, but more importantly, to really achieve a One Health outcomes. And with that specific idea, maybe it can be an agenda of advocacy to the finance ministries or finance people, as well as to the politician. That's what I want to mention. Over.
Thank you, Professor. Yes, Barbara. You are still on mute, I think.
I was going to say that very much chimes in with what I was going to suggest in a more theoretical way, but the practical example is really interesting to hear about. That our problem is that we are confined to Cartesian thinking, right? We're all brought up in this idea of reducing problems into parts, solving each parts, and then assuming that will solve the whole problem. And system thinking really challenges that, and One Health thinking is an example of system thinking. It's interested in the interconnectedness between things, and therefore instead of saying animal health or human health, we should be able to say how to best input resources into the system that produces this set of outputs that include human health, animal health, environmental health, and a range of other, what we've been calling co-benefits. But we find it extremely difficult to think that way. And I think relevant to our starting point, our institutional mechanisms are set up in a way that are aligned with the Cartesian thinking, so that we have a choice of either giving it to the human health sector or to the animal health sector. And therefore, the idea of clustering sectors and thinking about shared budgets is a great one. And then I think we have to move on from that to say, well, how do we actually manage those shared budgets, to think about where's the best place in the system to inject resources to produce the outcomes that we want, and where are all the levers, to go back to Angus's cogs, or our cogs. I mean, those were actually Angus's nice conceptual thinking that put the cogs in there. We need to get all those cogs functioning so that, I mean, if we think about this as a big machine with lots of cogs, first of all, we're saying, where do we pour the oil in? And then how do we make sure that all the cogs operate through the machine to produce the sets of outcomes, not just health, but food security, livelihoods, commercial opportunities, and so on out the other end. And our system, and our point is that our systems are really not set up to do that. We really need to think about what kinds of ways of structuring and organizing our systems would get us closer to that. Of course, we're never going to get to the point of the well-oiled machine, but we can keep trying to move in that direction.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, John, go ahead.
I think this is really interesting, and thanks, Barbara and Nitish, and an interesting question. I think one of the problems, and just breaking that down a little bit further from what Barbara was just saying, is that there is a terrible tendency from a lot of our technical friends and international agencies to be very disease-specific focused. And we need to move away from that into a health outcome, because that's what drives the benefit. It drives, if you're a poultry farmer, you're not interested whether they've got Newcastle disease or avian influenza, they're a dead chicken or a sick chicken. You want a healthy chicken you can sell. So that's the primary driver. We have to think in a more holistic way. And I think that again comes back onto the systems thinking. I think also, if we think about that logic of, we tend to think of prevention, detection, response, recovery, we need to bring in prediction in there as well. But before we get to that, if we think about disease specific, we tend to think about treatment, we think about vaccinations perhaps. Whereas if you think about prevention, we become a much more all-encompassing. We can think about risk management, and then we think about prevention, and that gives us our health outcomes. So again, it's that slight change of focus, but it becomes a much more all-encompassing systems type approach. And I think that is a key motivator. And I think if we think about motivation, and if you look at some of the sort of motivational logic, money is a motivator if you haven't got it. But if you have got some money, it's a pretty rotten motivator. You need to think much more broadly than just a money-driven system, I think. You need to think about the culture, the social economies, and the politics for sure. And you have this sort of hierarchy of improving motivation skills from basic physiological needs up to higher levels. And there's a whole lot of philosophy and logic around that. But I think if we're looking at change, and it depends whether we're looking at change at the political structural system or at the community level, then we have to think about those motivators for change. And the motivators for change, obviously, there's a constraint level, there's a driver, there's an opportunity. And fundamentally, certainly in poor context, we need to think about sustainable livelihoods. And alternatives if they are not just going to be bouncing along on the bottom. So again, systems thinking, absolutely. How do we bring that through? I think that's a whole lot of evolution of understanding. And it comes back again, I think, into that moving away from just pure technical skill sets into that broader context. And ultimately, as professionals, that has to change from the ground up, from our university education and from ongoing development through our careers. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Enki.
So I want to ask a question. So we have a quadripartite One Health focus and approach. What is going to be different from the joint policies or from within these organizations, WHO, UNEP, FAO, OIE? Are they going to take away the silos that are focused on disease, on maybe on only focusing on livestock health or human health? Because if they develop systems and policies for countries to follow, that will be a very strong encouragement for, or very strong regulation to make sure that countries are putting together resources that are purely for One Health. It's not siloed to any government, to any ministry, to any disease, or to any species. And we know that environmental health is important because of environmental stress, because of increased degradation of the environment, the ecosystems. We're seeing diseases that are new diseases spilling from wildlife to humans or to the livestock, or unknown diseases that we have never detected before. So it is all related to environmental stress. It's all related to the ecosystem degradation. It's related to exploitation of natural resources, exploitation of forests, and increased interface of human, livestock, wildlife. where we should be separate. But now we cannot prevent this. We are all integrated. So instead of developing siloed policies, siloed systems, siloed financial policies, I think the quadripartite One Health team probably need to develop a global system that to encourage countries to start following and contributing. I mean, there are a lot of funding directed to climate change or to ecosystem services, to human health, to animal health. If we at least put certain percentages of this funding into One Health pot or One Health funding, I think it will start a very good example. Just my opinion. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Dr. Enke. And you raise an important point there about, which is also I see in the Q&A about, you know, the role of the quadripartite and the new, the joint plan of action, which is currently still in the consultation phase. It will be presented again at the One Health side event next week in Lombok. But you know, the quadripartite are indeed, you know, there are 4 technical agencies, and I think, you know, the inclusion of UNEP is a huge step forward. You know, it is no longer the tripartite, but it is the quadripartite. But they are all still technical agencies, right? And perhaps we should move to a quinpartite would be the word, and include the World Bank, for instance. I think that might be, you know, a positive move. And I also note that, you know, another positive move is happening in the G20 that unfortunately so far only involving the human health, but there's now, you know, a regular joint meeting between health ministers and finance ministers. Now that's not a One Health meeting because it only has health ministers. It doesn't have agricultural ministers or environmental ministries, but it is recognizing the importance of, you know, bringing the ministries of finance on board at least. So I don't know if anybody has any further thoughts on that.
I was trying to respond to the previous question, which is again linked to your question.
Yes, please.
When we talk about the strength of the One Health chain is as strong as the strength of the weakest link, we should also try to understand the global hotspot countries are not the countries which are having huge resources and capacities. And they're always constrained with resources and capacities and institutional mechanisms. And it's also tough to have a priori assumption that One Health can be delivered only by a fully integrated institutional structure, because the real politic is completely different from what must be done, right? So to start somewhere, if we identify the weaker links and then make a case argument by sector and also by One Health, perhaps we will make an entry and we start conversation. Otherwise, it is going to be a high barrier which we'll try to create for ourselves. What I'm trying to say is, if there is an investment going in the animal production or animal health sector, we start the conversation and try to show how the One Health is going to benefit that motivation. In fact, John was mentioning about the drivers, right? The Department of Environment would be looking at different drivers than Department of Animal Health or animal production, right? So make a case for them, and then also try to say how the One Health is going to give them substantive co-benefit, so that you start an engagement and start an investment, at least to fix the animal health sector. Same way we start with an environmental health sector and also the human health sector. There is always possible to put in some resources for incentivizing the coordination, or otherwise try to invest in those mechanisms which will bring these sectors together. Otherwise, waiting for a fully integrated organization to deliver, I think it's little going to create a barrier for us to move in the direction we would want to move. So my argument is, start wherever you are, but have a big picture view, continuously sell that big picture view, make connections, incentivize the connections. At least we'll be able to make big gains by the small changes, what we are trying to do. And I'll give an example of such kind of a thing. When we started with the One Health analytics, we were only talking about EIDs, emerging infectious diseases, unknown pathogens. When we actually started the conversation with the Department of Agriculture guys, they said, okay, we understand what you're saying. I think what you mean to say is to improve the food safety so that we can, our exports, livestock exports will be more competitive. You see the point. We are trying to sell One Health, but the way the government is saying is from a different perspective. So can we try to bring this narrative so we show them win-win situation so that there is an investment flowing there? And then these are the resource constrained countries and also resource constrained sectors. So how do we move the investment there is a challenge. So that's my argument. I rest my case.
Thank you. Yeah. Anna. Yeah.
Thank you. And just to follow on from that, sorry, is that my microphone? No. I think, exactly, those points are really, really pertinent, and bringing back to how do we link what we do at that technical level or operational level with, finance ministers and these sorts of things. It's about finding those policy spaces that open up. And part of that is understanding what evidence is required by people that make those finance and investment decisions, and how do they want those things packaged. So, for example, I work in food security, agricultural innovation space. A lot of the things, when we talk the language of agriculture, in inverted commas, if we changed our language a little bit and reframed it, understanding what the policy processes were from the Ministries of Health or Environment perspective, for example, I think we could engage policymakers across those sectors. And that in turn helps engage the financiers and people responsible for handing down budgets through to those line ministries. So thinking around what are the policy processes for how decisions are made and how funding is allocated in ministries or by private sector or whichever actors we're talking about, and seeing how is there a way to better package some of the evidence, better speak the language that's outside our own sphere, so that it makes sense to others in other areas when, we're all trying to achieve the same thing, potentially, just using different language and in different ways. So yeah, policy processes are super important to understand.
Could I just add to that, Anna? That was,
was
what we were trying to get across with that idea that we have to speak to co-benefits as well as those so-called direct One Health outcomes. And frankly, if you're trying to sell the unknown benefit of pandemic prevention, who's ever going to pay for that? Because, when will it come and what's the value of that avoided cost? It's a very abstract idea. If you can say that someone's going to look after their cattle and their chickens better in a village, and that will actually support less transmission of disease between humans and animals, then you've actually got a message that you can sell to people who are making those day-to-day decisions, haven't you? So I think the more abstract and the grander the vision of One Health, actually the more important it is to get back and talk to those almost sectoral objectives, even if they're still big ticket items, because they're the things that people are likely to invest in and listen to.
Great. Any other thoughts? I think we've more or less worked our way through most of the questions here. I mean, maybe we still have just a few minutes left. I mean, there's quite a good final question here, basically on, if there was one thing that the G20 was going to do to promote One Health. And when we're talking about the G20, we're talking about, at the senior level, finance ministers, heads of state, maybe, health ministers, agriculture ministers, and so on as well. What do you think would be the one thing that should come out of all of this process? You know, if we are prioritizing One Health during Indonesia's presidency of the G20, what's the one thing that the G20 ought to do? Not you know, there's a long list of stuff, and the quadripartite, you know, continues to produce these lists. But what would be the top priority? What are your views? Who wants to go first? Yes, please, Professor Nitish.
Well, I will only advocate for One Health allotment, allocation in the government in the name of One Health, whatever it is, small or big amount. We need a specific allocation in the name of One Health. That would be most important. Now, how we will use it, that's a different way discussion, but that is what we needed. Not one specific disease, but in the name of One Health. That's what I want. Thank you.
Great. Yes, Barbara? You're muted.
I'm muted again. There's always one, isn't there? I would like each government or Ministry of Health to think about what it could contribute to the learning agenda that we're talking about, make one contribution of thinking about an innovation, a different way of doing things from the way they've always done things that they can trial and the world can learn from. I'd like each government to think of one thing it could do to contribute to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, John.
Yeah, they're really good, aren't they? It depends on sort of what level we're pitching this out of it. I put it in the chat box, using this sort of English aphorism, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And I think, we're coming off, we're at the sort of over the hill in terms of the COVID impact, but that has really shaken the world. But that was to a degree predicted. We've all been aware of emerging infectious diseases for 20 years. The World Bank, and CETA can correct me, was put out an economic analysis of prevention being, I forget the exact numbers, but hugely beneficial 10 years ago or something like that, and we've still fallen over. I think, we have to avoid the fatigue setting in that we regress to where we were 5 years ago. That's a disaster area. We have to push into that prevention logic. And I know that's terribly sort of nebulous. It's not like really answering a specific task, but I think we have to focus in on that as much as we can.
Yeah. Thank you. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, as we discussed earlier, I think basically recognizing the issue. So that's the key first at the top level. Of course, as all other speakers said, we don't need to reinvent a whole department again, but then basically first recognize that the need of this kind of a structured approach is necessary, and then identify various stakeholders who can be engaged in that, and then probably start building upon what is exactly available right now. We don't need to it's just integrating certain departments, certain sectors within their existing functional structures, basically a simple integration mechanism between a veterinary university to a medical university, a simple periodic working group between the ministries under the leadership of maybe financial ministry, like that. Some simple structures which are coordination, which are set for coordination and monitoring the situation, which actually brings a feeling that this is required. That indirectly brings the acceptance of this requirement, and then probably it can be built upon involving various sectors and then operate for operations and management. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. Anna?
Thank you. Yes, I guess I'd say thinking again from that, specifically from the finance economics side of things. Remember, many of you will know the Council on the Economics of Health for All was established at the end of 2020. And at that, the WHO Director General said, we don't just need more investment in public health, we must also rethink how we value health. And I guess my call to the G20 would be to include the way we value animal health and environmental health in that definition of public health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. Yes, Dr. Enki.
So we all know that among the G20 countries, nature-based solutions and protecting the biodiversity, it's becoming a hot topic, especially with the CBD coming up in Kunming or postponing. But it is still for countries a big debate on what would be our next biodiversity targets. Do we increase the protected areas? Do we increase the protection of critical species? Just like that, maybe even CBD should include One Health, environmental health, the inclusive health in their focus and target, and identify funding directed to this specific issue, whether it's the protection of the environment, to keep the people safe, to keep the animals safe, to keep the biodiversity safe. So at a larger global level, there has to be a first steps, first initiatives, a funding and a system in place to encourage this is how it needs to be done at a global level, which can be translated into local level, national level, regional level, local levels. So I really hope that G20 countries will discuss, include this as an important issue, recognize it as an important issue, and include this issue into the conventions. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay, any final thoughts, maybe from Sita? Yes, please.
Yeah, since the G20 is going to talk about economics, we can't run away. And all the countries are in the recovery phase of pandemic. So I think that's the best sell to them is that healthy people, healthy planet, healthy food is going to get you healthy economy. Better focus on these three, you will get where you want in a better way. Thank you.
Okay, very good. We still have a couple of minutes, so maybe we can finish where we started. Angus, do you have a final word for us? You started us off, right? Do you want to have a final word?
Thanks, John. I feel like with so many other smart things said tonight, it's difficult to add to that. I would add, but I would support the idea that if One Health needs to bring the environment into it properly, because I think that's at the heart of sustainable food production. It's at the heart of pandemic prevention. It supports ecosystem services that ultimately support healthy livelihoods and healthy communities. And I think there's still a risk that it's going to play a bad third fiddle. And I think maybe One Health in front of the G20 now is a way to really bring environment properly into the fold in a truly proper way, where if One Health is still dominated by notions of human public health, then we need to bring environment into that fully. I think it complements other ideas that, many fantastic ideas that people have said here, but I still see that as a key way to create that green, sustainable future that Sita was just alluding to as well.
Great, thank you so much, everybody. So to the two presenters, to Professor Barbara and Dr. Angus, and then to the 6 distinguished panelists, Dr. Chakrapani, Professor Nitish, Dr. Enki, Sita, Dr. Anna, Dr. John, thank you so much. This has been a very rich discussion. We have recorded it, so we will have it on the record. And hopefully this will also feed into the G20 meeting next week. So with that, let's close the discussion, and I will hand back to the MC. Over to you, Mas Rizky.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. John, for and all of the speakers for the session. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with all of us. And now, ladies and gentlemen, before we are going to close the webinar, Let's hear the summary and the conclusion of tonight's event, which will be delivered by the T20 Task Force 6 lead co-chair and former dean and former professor of health economics and policy of the School of Public Health, Universitas Indonesia. Please welcome Dr. Hasbullah Tabrani.
Yeah, thank you, Mas Rizky. Thank you, Pak John Ray, for excellent moderating this discussion tonight, second session, second day, and thanks also for Prof. Barbara, Dr. Chakravarti, Dr. Angus, Prof. Nitis, Dr. Sita, Dr. Anna, Dr. Ektufins, sorry, and Pak John, for the rich discussion. I'm amazed, and also thanks to the rich discussion for this and making the complete information for us as a T20 to bring and to prepare policy brief to be submitted to the G20 later this year. There's some key summarize. This is not necessarily complete all the precisely of your discussion. We will review again the record because all this discussion recorded and review and rewrite again. But for now, we can see or we can conclude that this One Health is broadly accepted, and this concept it's a good, very good concept, comprehensive concept, and good for the people, for the healthy planet, but it faces challenges to implement, partly because there are especially imbalance in funding, even just for public health. There are still a huge disparity in financing for public health program, from prevention to the treatment. And also, we have not yet discussed in more detail how the staffing for this is fulfilled and how required. But we already think about and this One Health, and also getting some example from yesterday from Africa, Bangladesh, Thailand, and some other places on earth that can be a good input for us to write the policy briefs. Thanks for the call for action from Barbara and Dr. Agus, that this is really will improve our understanding and enabling on One Health, especially how do we finance that. They've been discussed in more detail tonight, and we also acknowledge that the existing sector priorities might not be conducive at this time, but we identify how important to harmonize across sectors within the countries and across the country. They have different priorities and different level of harmonization across ministries, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Finance, Agriculture, Environment, and others. Certainly, future One Health financing mechanism must be incentivized, must be recognized, and the current barrier also must be identified to improve our concept policy recommendation that will be implementable. Tonight's discussion includes private sector, and we can see private sectors play a key role in finding innovation, diagnostics, effectiveness intervention, new innovation, and making the supply chains possible, that play important role also in in making One Health applicable, doable, and usable to improve the health of the population. Aside from public funding that's normally for this kind of endeavor, long-term endeavor, it is necessary, but insurance model, private bonds, innovative financing, and probably also mixed financing, public-private should be dig more to see how the public and private financing can work together, complement each other, and supplement that finally reach our goal to have healthier people, more prosperous people in the changing environment, under pressure of meeting adequate safety of foods, livestock, and security for all us with increasing number of populations on this planet. While investing in education and multi-sectoralism with the new paradigm is also important element. Should not be like behind to concentrate on the aspect of diagnosis or early detection or prompt intervention because human resources that capable of bringing all this One Health into a reality is important element. In principle, adequacy, equitable financing, and sustainability of financing in this evolving concept of One Health, I think this is evolving because we need to still need to improve how we organize harmonization across sectors, but also across different level of countries' capability, interoperability, and collaboration across different level of income across countries, also important element to be discussed. Lastly, political leadership and engagement with not only executive arm of the government, but also legislative member of governments become essential to ensure that this One Health excellent thinking, excellent concept can be implemented. In fact, the G20 meeting is a political instrument, and therefore we will be using, as Sita mentioning, that we'll be using this opportunity after the COVID. So what next step? We certainly we will write this policy brief, and we will discuss also with other task force. Under the T20, we have 9 task force, which include financing task force, which include food safety and security task force, which include environmental task force, and which includes digitalization task force. So when we discuss with them, we will write policy brief, and then we expect that you still can continue to contribute by reviewing and putting feedback. Certainly next week there will be a G20 health working group meetings in Lombok, just next to Bali. And on the June 8th, there will be discussion on One Health and also antimicrobial resistance. That also important both for animal agriculture and also human public health. We thanks very much for all of your input. We hope that we can work together and putting and circulate like 3 to 5 top priorities to be submitted to G20 and probably G7 next year in Japan. Thank you all again. It is a great contribution for this world. Thank you so much. Thank you also for the organizer, Center for Health Administration and Policy Studies, USAID, SAIAC, and others, DFED, Pak John. Thank you. All right.
Okay, we would like to thank Dr. Hasbullah Tabrani for giving us the conclusion. And ladies and gentlemen, that marks the end of tonight's webinar. Once again, we would like to thank all of the speakers, all of the moderators and participants for joining us tonight. And also, we would like to remind all participants to fill out the attendance form and the evaluation form that have been sent in the chat box earlier. And also, if you missed the webinar, you can rewatch the recording of yesterday's session as well as tonight's session on YouTube. Kindly go to the YouTube of the School of Public Health Universitas Indonesia, and you can find the recording of our webinars there. And aside from that, we also would like to inform that you can still rewatch One Health-related videos on YouTube. Kindly check on the link that is shown on the screen right now. Ladies and gentlemen, we also would like to take this opportunity to inform you about the series of events that are held by Task Force 6 of T20 Indonesia. Our next event will be held on June 6th to June 9th, namely Health Working Group Meeting and One Health side event organized by the Ministry of Health of Indonesia. And that's all for today. Once again, we would like to thank all of the speakers, moderator, and all participants for joining us tonight. We hope that all of us can leave the webinar with brand new insights that will be useful for our lives. My name is Rizky Ramadan. Thank you so much, and we will see you on our next event.
Thank you, Rizky. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Good day. Thank you.